Hello dear viewers, thank you for choosing the Manhwa compilation channel. Please leave feedback in the comments after watching. Enjoy watching. The boy was standing in the middle of the road. A car flew towards him. He never thought that he, a simple office worker, would get into an accident. This sudden car accident sent him into a completely different world. What happened to the one who appeared before him? When the boy woke up, a small, creepy demon was sitting on him. The guy couldn't just watch and wait for death. Tearing the demon off his chest, he thought that it wanted to eat him. Then the boy, in order to protect himself, decided to eat him himself and grabbed his head with his teeth. The demon's blood dripped onto his jade pendant that hung around his neck. After that, everything changed. Demon soared upward as if dissolving in the green haze of his pendant. While he was at a loss, a mysterious man appeared in front of him and directed him to the Night Jing Division. So he became a security guard in dark clothes who specialized in working with strange creatures. The boy stood in front of the bloody dead corpses of people. Some of the men lying on the floor were mauled to death. Other people have died from overeating. He won't say what exactly they ate. The boy learned to reveal strange secrets and look for the spirits of the dead, even among poor people, because they could be anywhere. He only did this for one thing, namely, to destroy demons and destroy chaos in the world. The main character used the cursed hand of a dead man. It was a blow with the name of such power in order to plunge monsters into the underworld. And now we return to the very beginning. It was night outside, very gloomy and rainy weather. Some guy was walking along a long corridor holding a lamp in his hands, which illuminated his path. He approached the door behind which some strange sounds were heard. The guy opened the door and went inside. Well, when he went there, his eyes couldn't believe what they saw, since it was a very creepy sight. On his young master, right on his chest, sat a small, evil little demon. He sank his teeth into the boy's chest. The guy dropped the lamp from his hands out of fear and fell to the floor. He began to call anyone for help. He began to run out of this room, without ceasing to call someone for help, since most likely the young master was dead. Something happened to him. The guy was very scared and ran away from there as fast as he could. And the little demon tore the young master's chest. Blood splashed in scarlet drops around. The young master was still unconscious, but little by little he began to come to his senses. After which, starting to open his eyes, he realized that he felt pain, from which he woke up. The boy thought it was sitting on him. Having finally woken up, he realized that his chest was being torn apart by some nasty little monster. It was what caused him this severe pain. The guy tried to unhook his sharp fangs from his body. He realized that the demon wanted to eat him. Not wanting to die from the monster's fangs, he grabbed his head with his teeth so that blood began to flow out of his forehead. Allah, a trickle of blood fell directly on the amulet that hung on the boy's chest, after which something changed. The little demon seemed to begin to dissolve and move away from the boy, flying away somewhere. Meanwhile, someone was running up to the house. A woman's hand instantly opened the front door. The grandmother, seeing her grandson, began to call him, calling him a capable grandson. The boy stood up to remember who they were. After all, he just came to his senses and apparently was reborn. These were memories after the transition. Tears appeared in Grandma's eyes. A woman standing nearby asked her grandmother why she was crying, since the demon did not kill him. Grandma asked what she was carrying, as if Noah died, she would be happy about it. The guy glanced at his grandmother and asked her not to worry. He's not that easy to kill. Suddenly, a man appeared on the threshold and noticed that the demonic aura in this house was very heavy. It was the guard of the capital's Night Division, Mason. He looked very majestic and was armed. Noah asked his grandmother who he was, to which she explained that this was Mr. Mason from the Night Jing department, specializing in incidents with demons. The man said that the yang energy of the Ho residence is very strong. I wonder where the evil spirits come from in such a place. Looking towards the boy, he noticed that most likely it was all because of the man. The woman immediately began to get angry and indignant. She asked who could be so bold as to harm their young master Ho residence. Mason replied that he doesn't know how it is now, but this time the gentleman was really lucky. But he exclaimed that if he was fine this time, it doesn't mean that next time it will be the same. And he asked the gentleman if he could show him the way to salvation. Mason noticed that Mr. Nav is very brave. He saw courage in this young man, and after thinking a little, he answered that there are two ways to find the path to salvation. The first is to find monks or Taoist priests who are deeply versed in Taoism to purify Mr. Noah's yin. But this will protect him only for a while, but not for life. Then the main character asked what about the second method. Mason explained that the second way to join the Night Jing Division Mr. Noah's life is noble, so he can recommend him to join the night department in the Eastern District. Noah asked whether joining the night squad guarantees his safety. Thinking, he remembered that this place specializes in working with ghosts and evil spirits. Mr. Mason explained that it is not safe, but Jing can teach him how to cultivate. No one can protect him except himself. When leaving, he asked Mr. Noah to think about staying or leaving. The grandmother tried to stop the gentleman and asked why Noah would go to such a place. While she was watching Mason, the woman told the main character that he needed to rest. After which, the boy still listened to his family and lay down on his bed. He held his amulet in his hands, looking at it and thinking very much about something. The boy realized that this jade pendant, which he bought at the market, helped him to be reborn in another world. He remembered that that ghost also disappeared thanks to this jade pendant. The pendant began to glow in his hands. Noah wondered what was happening this time. He began to be reflected in the bright green light of his pendant. Noah thought, and his gaze changed dramatically. He couldn't understand what was happening to him now. After which he seemed to find himself in a different place, or perhaps he had moved again. This time it looks like it's inside the pendant. He was in some starry area. Opposite him stood the monster that attacked him. The main character noticed that he was right. This baby demon monster is also here. The boy held his head with one hand, closing his eyes. He exclaimed what a mess looking at his pendant. Looking at the demon, Noah noticed that it didn't seem to have the same hostility as before. This jade pendant also has the ability to subdue evil spirits. The little demon squeaked something, pointing his finger in some direction. The main character asked if he too could help him get out. He squeaked something again, squeezing both paws together. Then the boy took him on his shoulder and decided to try it. He held a jade pendant in one hand. Noah clutched his pendant in his hand as tightly as possible and closed his eyes. It lit up with a bright green light. The boy lay on the floor, as if a demon was sitting exhausted next to him. They continued to glow with a green glow. Noah thought that this was using up too much spiritual power. Looks like he can't stay outside for long. But this is another means of self-preservation. The main character looked at the little demon and thought what else could he do other than eat people. The little creature squeaked something, and thin black smoke came from its mouth. Meanwhile, the woman stood next to the man and looked into some kind of portal. She exclaimed that this creature was worthless. After all, Noah did not die, but instead, this man suffered. He, in turn, wondered why the demon of his soul had lost contact with him. The main character saw these two and understood their insidious plans. The one who wanted to kill him turned out to be his aunt. And here in front of us is the training ground of the Ho residence. A wide, spacious yard in which Noah and his trainer were. The boy closed his eyes while standing in front of the concrete training pillar. He tried to concentrate, and having collected all his energy, as if he had meditated, he hit the training post with all his might. It cracked and fragments scattered to the sides. The main character grabbed his hand, because he was still in pain. The trainer said that his blow split the stone, which means he must have reached the initial stage of external training. Now we can consider that he has crossed the threshold of the cultivator. Noah exclaimed that this was thanks to two mysterious teaching techniques that Mr. Mason gave him. The man replied that this was just a base. If he wants to improve, he will have to improve on his own. The main character clenched his hands, clasping them. He told his coach that he understood everything. The coach, in turn, asked the boy which path he would choose, a key practitioner or martial artist. Noah wondered if it was possible to practice both. The man replied that, after all, human energy is limited, and it is quite difficult to cultivate it to its peak. 9 stages of martial arts: external training, internal training, bone hitting, bleeding, mountain observation, sea observation, divine gate, transcendence, war genius. He suggests practicing martial arts first, and studying chi cultivation as an auxiliary tool for now. The boy said that he understood everything, but he wonders what path Mr. Mason is cultivating and at what level he is. Mr. Mason explained that he cultivates the martial path. Well, as for the level, his martial arts level is 7th, impact with bones. The QE gathers in the bones, the bone marrow is purified, the true ki will be compressed, and the flesh becomes comparable to a sword. She can split even gold or stone. The main character listened very carefully. It was very interesting and exciting. Basically, he was a very inquisitive guy, who was interested in everything new and incredible. Mr. Mason said that he was curious why the boy agreed to go to the Jing Night Division if he was the son of the valiant Hao. Noah explained that the world is in chaos. Evil spirits are rampant. No one can protect him except himself. He made it clear that he was ready to perform extraordinary feats without fear of death. They stood opposite each other, many small fragments flying around as they practiced. Mr. Mason praised the main character, calling him a great, ambitious man. He saw in the boy strength and power, ambition and desire to train. Then a man turned to the young gentleman, explaining that the cart was already ready. He waited for him with his hands folded in front of him and his head slightly bowed. He explained that the boy could already leave, and froze in anticipation. The man was simply waiting for an answer from the boy. Noah told Mr. Mason that he had to go, after which the gentleman said goodbye to the boy. And so they went their separate ways until the next training session. When the main character returned to his place, his grandmother advised him to take care of himself when he arrived in Heian, because she was very worried about her granddaughter. She asked him to buy whatever he wanted and not worry about money. Noah asked his grandmother not to worry, because her grandson would be able to look after himself. The son of the second uncle, Mike, approached the boy and wished him a happy journey. The main character thanked his brother by patting him on the shoulder as a sign of friendship. Noah, looking at the guy, thought that the reason why his aunt wants to get rid of him is mainly because of this brother. The main character seemed to see right through them all, but he pretended that he didn't understand anything for the sake of his own safety and that of others. Aunt, in turn, stood nearby and pretended to cry. It's supposedly hard for her to see him leaving so suddenly. Knowing that this was all a lie for the main character, it was funny from the outside, but he under no circumstances betrayed his emotions. The boy looked at his aunt from under his brows and asked her not to worry, because he would return. And I thought that this woman was just something, and now the driver was already urging the horse on, raising his strong whip higher. They rushed forward as fast as they could, striving for new horizons that had not yet opened up to the boy. But everything was already very close ahead. The cart stopped next to them with a lot of noise. Only the clouds came from under its wheels. The horse harnessed seemed to be afraid of something. The main character was already sitting in the carriage, opening the curtain. He looked out and waved goodbye to everyone. The boy thought that one day he would return here and cast a farewell glance at his aunt, who wished him death. Still, she wasn't that smart, since she didn't understand that the boy knew everything about it. Driving through the entire city to the exit, Noah decided that someday he would trample this capital. Someday, he will repay everyone for the injustice, and he will certainly punish his offenders as soon as he becomes stronger, and as soon as he opens new horizons for himself. The carriage raced for many kilometers forward through the thicket of a dense green forest. All you could hear was the clatter of hooves and the sound of heavy wheels. The driver urged his horse on, quietly humming a song. The birds sang around and it seemed like there was no sign of trouble. Moreover, the day was very sunny and clear. There wasn't a single cloud in the sky. The main character at some point fell asleep while sitting in the lotus position. He closed his eyes and quietly rested. He drove calmly, but still subconsciously was on guard. Then suddenly someone blocked the way of the approaching cart. It seemed that nothing foreshadowed bad events, but anything could happen along the way. The boy had to be ready for anything. The driver immediately stopped his horse abruptly, holding the reins tightly. The horse reared up from such a sharp braking. Noah immediately woke up and was a little worried that this could happen. Who could stand in their way so brazenly and shamelessly? He tensed a little, thinking. Two guys stood in front of them. One of them is an outcast from the Hall of the Broken Sword, Patrick. The second outcast of the Jiangxi Ghost Hand family, Jacob. The cab driver went down to the guys and reported to them that Noah was in the cart. He checked. The boy was unarmed, and he asked what happened to the payment agreement. Patrick, looking at the man, asked him not to worry, as he would give him everything. After which the driver's head was separated from the body. This happened quite unexpectedly. The guy pulled the sword out of its sheath with lightning speed, and in one movement swollen the head of the defenseless cab driver, who handed over the main character to the bandits. Jacob asked Patrick if he could handle it alone. After all, the teacher said that this guy is not strong. Then Patrick turned to the guy and asked him to rely on him. He had some kind of black bandage on his left eye. Apparently fate left him without one eye. Jacob remained standing among the trees, and Patrick was already approaching the cart. He came very close and pointed his bloody sword right in front of him. He pointed his bloody sword straight at the curtain, pushing it aside. But the main character didn't have to wait long. He never let himself be offended and was not going to give in to his offenders. Something flew towards Patrick, but the guy laughed and exclaimed that this was desperate resistance. Some thick water flew towards him. It looked more like white thick foam. The guy felt some kind of powder on himself. He began to scream wildly. This powder began to scatter across it like snow. It actually glowed white. At this moment, when the guy closed his eyes, a fiery sword was approaching him. Before he could make a sound, a sharp sword pierced his throat and streams of scarlet blood gushed out, spilling onto the cold metal. The main character flew up and stabbed him with a sword so that it went right through him, mercilessly killing the bad guy. Jacob, watching from the sidelines, did not expect such an outcome of events. He saw his brother Patrick die. He began to get seriously angry, slowly realizing what had happened. But the guy was still alive, since the sword hit him in the chest a little below the throat. He asked if Noah was unarmed. The main character stood over this bad man who wanted to kill him, and looked at him menacingly without releasing his sharp, heavy sword. The boy thought that fortunately, the Tongyo jade pendant could hold a weapon, which helped take him by surprise and kill him. Pull the weapon out of Patrick's chest, the main character wished him to rest in peace. The guy's brother Jacob screamed in horror. After all, now his brother was killed before his eyes. He was simply at a loss and was ready to tear and cut his opponent into pieces. After which, Noah kicked Patrick with all his might. He had no intention of stopping or giving up. Anyone who has something against him must certainly pay for it. He flew towards Jacob with lightning speed, hitting his chest. The main character quickly headed towards Jacob and, having caught up with him, found himself behind. Noah stood up to attack the criminal who wanted to kill him along with his brother. This should not have gone unpunished. But then the boy noticed something and was very surprised. His eyes widened. This was something new for him. But the boy tried to understand what was happening. Jacob's hand was wrapped in bandages. The guy began to take off these bandages, which scattered into pieces, falling to the ground. Well, what was under these bandages? It was a powerful, huge hand with long, sharp claws, clearly not human. The guy began to parry the enemy's blow with his vile hand, pushing him far back. But the main character flew away and landed on one knee without dropping his sharp dagger. He was very strong and brave. Fighting for justice, the guy was not going to give up or stop. Scarlet blood sprayed from the boy's mouth. The enemy exclaimed that his ordinary sword was simply useless in this case. After all, he is simply powerless against his demonic hand of a dead man. The man stood in front of the main character in a very creepy, distorted form. He was like a mutated monster. Noah thought that his left hand was emitting a strange yin aura, and it looked problematic, so he needed to deal with it first. Jacob said that it seems his strength has just entered the path of 9 ranks, but he is already experienced. Even though he killed Patrick, he has no chance against the hand of a dead man. The main character thought that this strange man's dead hand must be the vein-cutting technique recorded in the art of the astral deity. The practitioner used his own blood to nourish the dead man's limb, and all the power was concentrated in it. Noah decided that if this was the case, then he should have a chance to win, and he exclaimed that you should not underestimate the enemy, otherwise you might die yourself. The man became very angry. He clenched his vile teeth and moved to attack the main character. He promised to chop the boy into mince, rushing towards him like an angry demon. His face was distorted with anger and hatred, and also a thirst for revenge. Noah concentrated, directing all his strength and energy against him. He clenched his heavy sword and pointed it towards the enemy. They flew towards each other, one with a ball, the other with a fist. But the protagonist's sword bent from the steel fist of a monster hand. He didn't expect that this hand was so strong that it could bend his sword, after which it shattered into small pieces, falling down uselessly. Jacob exclaimed joyfully that the enemy's weapon was broken. Directing his hand towards the boy, he pushed him with all his might into the chest, and he said that now it's the end for him. The pendant on the main character's neck glowed with a bright green light. Noah gave the command to the spiritual demon to come out. He needed the animal's help. Great power and bright green shades flowed from the boy's pendant. She headed towards the enemy in a powerful stream, trying to hit his demonic essence. A small demon came out of this pendant, who once attacked the main character and immediately jumped on Jacob, biting into his chest. The guy was surprised that this demon was being summoned again at the 5th level. He was very surprised how the boy controlled it, to which Noah exclaimed that he was already dead. Why was he asking so many questions? But the man tore the monster away from his chest and said that he had no chance against 5 demons. But there was only one. It would not harm him in any way. Then the main character changed his face, and some kind of plan stuck in his head. He was very clever and smart enough to get out of it or make something up on the fly. Approaching his hand, the boy exclaimed that his goal was definitely not his life, Because this is a ghost, it can be absorbed by the Tongyo jade pendant. Jacob screamed with a terrible cry. The main character was able to find a weak spot by injuring his demon hand. He simply cut it off completely. It disappeared into a thick black haze. Jacob fell to his knees, growling in pain and despair. Noah thought that the hands of a dead man were really the source of his strength, but his absorption took away a lot of his spiritual energy. The man shouted towards the main character, asking him to return his hand. Then the boy threw up the sword with his foot and kicked it towards Jacob, exclaiming that he was Noah. He didn't pay back his debts. His cold, sharp weapon hit the man right in the chest, piercing right through. Completely bloodied, he fell face down, pierced by a sharp sword. Noah thought it was close. Without the jade pendant, Tongyo is afraid that he would die. The main character approached Patrick, who was lying dead on the ground. He saw a book in his bosom, The Art of the Sword, and I thought I could use this. The boy decided that if these were dead, then others would come. To be on the safe side, it is better to continue along the path. And leaving the carriage with the horse, Noah went forward on his own. Not afraid of what awaits him ahead. The main character opened the book and thought that this broken ball technique may seem simple, but it is so versatile that it can work with many types of weapons, which is very convenient. The boy walked and walked. It was almost dark. He thought that he needed to find a place to rest. Then he suddenly stopped seeing something in the distance. In front of him was some small old building. He headed in that direction. The main character decided that it looks like today this place will be his roof. The boy approached the door and, just in case, knocked. He went inside. In front of him stood some kind of huge stone statue. Her eyes glowed with a blue, transparent light. The boy heard whose voice it was. Someone asked who came to their house. The main character asked not to worry, because he was just a passerby. A man with a saber stood right in front of him, and sitting next to him was another man and some girl. She asked her Uncle Harry to put the sword away and not scare the young master. The uncle immediately listened to the girl. The boy knelt in front of them, showing his upbringing. He greeted everyone in the house politely. The old man sitting on a chair next to the girl told the gentleman that the night was already cold. Why don't he warm up with them by the fire? The main character thanked him and sat down on a chair next to the owners. Then he became a little wary because he heard someone's voice telling the guys to go faster. But a girl opened the door, and she was very surprised that there were so many people here. One of the men who was with the girl told his brother Leo that he didn't think there was any need to rest and asked him to just hurry on. Left asked where they should rush, since it was better to get some sleep first. Leo and the girl sat down near the fire. The guy said it was fate. He is an outstanding disciple of the Qingyun sword clan of the Eastern Lin County. They should all have heard of his clan's great name. Then the girl replied that if they were disciples of the Qingyun sword clan, then she conveyed her respects to them. A boy named Leo immediately looked at the girl and said that you shouldn't be so polite to them. Then the girl who came with them introduced herself as Mary, a disciple of the Qingyun sword clan. She followed her older brother to explore the world. And this is Mike, a scientist whom they met on the road, going to the capital to take an exam. The unexpected guests all stared at the main character. Then he also introduced himself, saying that his name was Noah, and he was an ordinary adventurer. Mary stared at the boy strangely, and Uncle Mike was completely bored. The girl who owned this house also looked at everyone strangely, because they were all unexpected guests in their house. The boy Leo looked very carefully at the mistress of the house. Apparently he liked her. Mary said that the night was long. Why don't they tell some stories to pass the time? Mike replied that since Mrs. Mary liked it, he would start with the story about the tiger. It is said that a person eaten by a tiger becomes a ghost and attracts passers-by to him. Only when the tiger has a new ghost does he release the previous one. Mary exclaimed that the ghosts are so evil that they help tigers harm people. The man explained that this is also typical for people. The main character looked at the others and said that he would also tell a story. During his night walk, Arthur met several passers-by at the Temple of the Mountain Gods and struck up a good conversation with them. Then a silhouette appeared near the door. Someone opened the door with his hand. Arthur turned his head, and the people standing next to him also turned around, looking at the door. The man who opened the door asked him why he was talking to himself. Then the boy was very surprised at how this happened to himself, and the man had already gone inside. Mary asked the people who were talking to Arthur if they were ghosts, to which the main character replied, "Who will tell her the truth?" He rustled the fire with a thin branch from a tree. Leo listened very carefully and squinted, beads of sweat running down his face. After which he crossed his arms over his chest and said that the stories they tell are more scary than valiant. So he asks permission to tell a story from personal experience. A year ago, on the battlefield in Haitian County, an evil Taoist key practitioner turned all the corpses into zombies. These were the corpses of the brave and courageous, and their bodies were terribly poisoned. He happened to be nearby at that time, so he killed all the zombies with his sword. He was very strong, so he didn't leave a wet spot behind them, rejoicing at his victory. He remembers that night when the moon was so bright that the stars dimmed and the wind was gusty, just like this moment. The weather was bad under the full moon. The wind was driving up dark and cold clouds. Something strange was happening outside. The wind, with its own gust, opened the doors.
During this story, the main character thought that in the meantime something was happening in the yard.
There were a lot of zombies walking around the yard. Some have arrows stuck into their bodies, others have swords, and they all walked very slowly. Someone without a hand, someone without ears and nose. The main character and Leo looked out into the street. Leo exclaimed that this couldn't be true. He was just chattering. Noah asked the guy if these are the zombies he was talking about. These corpses are probably very weak, but so many zombies are not easy to deal with. Mary told her brother that he was good at killing zombies, so she can lend him her sword. Then the boy squealed like a girl. Was his sister really doing this on purpose? Beads of sweat ran down his cheeks. And the girl who owned the house said that the space in the temple of the mountain god is small. If the zombies get together, they will not be able to stop them. Then a sound was heard like an explosion. Stones flew around. Clouds of smoke and dust mixed with the ground. Mary and Leo looked to the side in surprise, wondering what kind of explosion it was. The owner of the house also wondered, not understanding what the unclear sound was. The main character, going out into the street, broke through a stone wall and asked them to follow him, proudly standing on the outskirts with his sword in his hands. The whole house was burning with a huge bright red fire. The zombies were not far from him. The weather was exactly the same as Leo told his story. The moon was shining and dark clouds rolled in. Gusts of wind blew leaves from huge green trees. The main character and everyone else broke through the thicket of the forest, running as far away from this house as possible. They ran as fast as possible so that the evil, creepy zombies wouldn't catch up with them. Noah, looking at the angry corpses, wondered if the fire really stopped them. And the zombies ran very quickly, opening their huge evil mouths with sharp fangs and extending their gnarled hands with long black claws. One of them was already overtaking the girl who owned the house. His vile hand was reaching straight towards her. But it was not to be. Her uncle instantly cut off the hand of this vile, disgusting zombie monster. Harry asked the girl to be careful. He pierced with his sword a zombie who was trying to grab her. The sword went right through his head. It was a terrible sight. Well, somehow I had to fight off the vile creatures. The boy Leo exclaimed that the weak point of these monsters is the head. The main character immediately agreed with him, drawing his sharp, heavy sword. In turn, Mike noticed a path not far from them. This is the path going down the mountain. The man called everyone to follow him. Leo realized that this was a very good way out and called his sister to go with him. The main character asked these people not to go with him, because there is something wrong with this scientist. Mike exclaimed that he was kind enough to save him, but he suspects him. What kind of ingratitude it is. After which, the like wished everyone good luck in fighting off the zombies and walked forward along the path. The girl didn't want to go, but Leo grabbed her hand and asked her not to stand like a pillar, because she needed to follow her brother. Then the mistress of the house turned to the others. She said that Mr. Noah says that there is something wrong with the scientist. Why not believe him? The main character said that he said everything he had to say. But if they don't believe him, then he can't do anything. What to do if they don't want to listen to him? Everyone has their own choice. Saying this, the boy cut down one zombie that stood in his way. Leo asked his sister to go, and he would delay the rest of the zombies, protecting her. Noah turned his head to the side and thought that nothing good was expected from this scientist. There was a powerful, sharp sound, and Leo, holding the sword in his hands, flew off onto a huge, hard stone, hitting his back. Mary quickly ran up to the boy and asked her brother how he was. The left one, holding his chest with his hand, began to cough. The main character, looking somewhere up, realized that the one who was supposed to come had already appeared. A monster with a long tail and saber-sharp claws appeared right in the sky against the backdrop of a huge, bright moon. He landed from the sky onto a sharp, large rock. It was a creepy, demonic ghost. Meanwhile, Uncle Mike stood behind that rock watching what was happening. The main character told the owner of the house that it was just like in the story with the tiger. Mike was that same ghost. Mary screamed, turning to the main character to save her brother. Tears flowed down the girl's cheeks. Noah thought that the situation was now critical, and if they were left without Leo, the situation would be even more unfavorable for them. Mary held her brother in her arms, and the demonic ghost was already approaching her from behind. He carefully examined his victims in preparation for the attack. He was very huge and scary. His eyes reflected emptiness, and instead of pupils there were red glowing dots. The main character said that this insignificant tiger dares to act without limits in his presence. He readied his sharp sword. The boy asked Leo to leave this tiger to him and go deal with the zombies himself. Leo immediately listened to the main character and said that he would do this, and let Noah be careful. At this time, the demonic monster was already running towards them. The main character felt a very powerful aura. It's time to try out the broken sword technique. The boy took his sharp sword in his hands, and preparing to attack, stood in a pose to use the form of a heavy ball. His sword seemed to glow with a bright blue light. He put it in front of him, and the demonic monster was already attacking. The main character realized that this was not an option. It will not be possible to deduce on only one sword. We need to come up with some other plan. The demonic monster froze, waiting for what the boy would come up with. Noah was already in the air above him, using the cursed dead man's hand. He flew up as high as possible. His hand glowed with green bright lightning, after which the boy, pointing this luminous hand at the demonic monster, threw it straight into the rocky soil with one heavy blow. The soil scattered, stones rolled to the sides, mixing with dust and smoke, and the demonic monster was defeated and fell face first onto the rock. Noah didn't expect this hand to be so powerful. One hit and the demonic tiger rests. The boy came closer to the dead demonic monster and, like a purple haze, was reaching towards him, right towards his body. He thought that the strength of this tiger had strengthened his body. Is it possible that with each new murder of a demonic creature, its power also grows? At this time, Mike's scream was heard. He laughed and shouted joyfully that freedom had finally come. Freedom had come for him. But the main character turned around and asked who it was that told him that there was freedom. The spirit of the one eaten by the tiger is still the same ghost, the seal of golden light. The art of the astral deity should have an effect on it. The boy pointed a bright yellow seal in his direction. Mike turned to face this seal and froze in place. He lit up with a bright fiery light and began shouting that he shouldn't do this. It was like some kind of portal that was killing him by pulling him inside. The main character thought it was yin power. The power that comes from killing ghosts and killing demons is surprisingly different. If one can improve one's strength by killing ghosts and demons, then it will not be difficult to practice 2 cultivation paths at once. So, the boy thought, how can he strengthen and increase his strength? Meanwhile, the owner of the house heard something. The main character also heard some sound from behind and immediately became wary. Mary screamed for help. One of the zombies grabbed her sharp sword with his teeth. Leo immediately turned around and realized that his sister needed help. But in the meantime, he himself was fighting off the zombies. Then Noah came to the rescue. Having accelerated, he flew into the air and kicked the zombie in the face as hard as he could. It was a beautiful, strong blow. The monster flew away, falling onto the stones, making a heavy, loud sound. He began to growl very terribly and rolled head over heels straight towards a huge, thick tree trunk. Leo asked Mary if she was okay, running closer to her. The girl replied that yes, there is no longer the danger of that terrible zombie. There were more and more of them. It seemed as if they were simply surrounded. They stood back to back with drawn swords, preparing to repel the attack. The main character said that there are too many of these zombies. A fight is not a way out of the situation. Leo replied that the corpses must be managed by someone. He must be somewhere nearby. Noah asked if someone was controlling them. Leo explained that this is how it is. If they can kill the person who controls these zombies, then they will stop moving. Noah understood the boy's point. He noticed that most of the zombies were coming from this side of the forest. This means that the one who controls these zombies must be somewhere in the same place, in the same part of the forest. The boy thought that the man controlling the zombies was clearly watching them from afar. The main character, straining all his thoughts and instincts, directed his gaze somewhere into the distance and realized that he had found the one he was looking for. Noah exclaimed that if they all trusted him, then he should try to detain these zombies while he deals with this man. Mary said that she was ready to fight side by side with Brother Noah. Leo also said that this could be left to him. The lady of the house, Florence, also said that she relies on young Master Noah. Leo, jumping in the air, took his sharp sword with both hands and exclaimed that he, Leo, was an outstanding disciple of the Qing-Yun sword clan, and zombies are just trash. Jumping very high, he swung his sharp sword and landed cutting the zombies into pieces. Reflecting the attack of terrible monsters, they trusted the main character and asked him to move forward and do what he had in mind. The boy in turn was already rushing forward, jumping onto a huge tree trunk. And thus, jumping through the trees, he looked for the zombie manager. And after walking a long way from tree to tree, from branch to branch, he finally jumped to the last branch he needed. And after listening carefully to the environment, he felt that the one he needed was nearby. Indeed, he saw a man standing on the ground with a staff in his hand. Noah asked him to stop hiding, because you still can't escape death. The old man who controlled the zombies exclaimed that the boy was brave, but without valor. He was fingering some rosary beads in his hand. A strong wind rose sharply, tearing off the leaves of trees in the dense forest. The old man gave the command to his zombie subordinates to catch the main character and tear him into pieces. Then Noah, without thinking twice, began to use the power of the cursed hand of the dead man. His hand glowed again with bright green lightning, and the boy jumped towards danger. After which he landed right in front of the old man standing with a staff. Grandfather was very surprised, because the hand of the dead man is the Xiangxi Wu family. Apparently, he realized what kind of hand it was, and began shouting to the boy not to do this. The old man was seriously scared. But the main character was already flying up to him, and with the powerful hands of a dead man, she had already sealed him to a huge, thick tree trunk. Noah simply crushed his head on the trunk with this hand. He exclaimed that who the old man was certainly did not concern him. Meanwhile, those who fought with the zombies realized that Brother Noah had mastered the control of the monsters. Leo laughed and exclaimed that everything happened as he said. The main character tried to hit one of the zombies with his sword, and realized that he really wasn't moving. Leo asked Mary to watch how mercilessly this Noah throws punches. The world is a dangerous place, so you can't just trust people like that. Mary asked why then he so easily believed that ghost. Leo, closing his eyes, replied that his sister had already grown up, so you can't raise him anymore. After which the same mistress of the house, Florence, told the old man that he was trash. He couldn't even cope with such a small thing, and yet because of him they were almost exposed. The old man admitted his mistake, and Florence told him that if this happens again, he should set himself on fire and just die. And here we are a few hours later. The sun was already slowly rising. A thin, light fog rose over the mountains. Standing on a high cliff under a green, fluffy tree, the main character told everyone else that this is where all their roads diverge. Leo wished his brother Noah a safe journey, and Mary asked her brother Noah to teach her how to kill monsters when the opportunity arises. Florence thanked Mr. Noah for his help. The main character, raising his hand, said goodbye to his new acquaintances, with whom they had gone through such a difficult fight against zombies. And now 3 more days have passed. A large, spacious mansion stretched out in front of us. The right hand of the head of the Night Division, Jing Jackson, spoke to the main character, whether he was the same Noah whom Mason recommended to him. Noah knelt down in front of the man and expressed his respect to Mr. Jackson. Jackson said that the boy came just in time, because they just don't have enough hands. He explained this by saying that they had lost a lot of people during the last missions. The main character was really thinking about something. His gaze was somehow alarmed and wary. Jackson asked him not to be afraid. He would work as a security guard for Xuanja. Under Night Patrolman Jerry, he would be safe with him. Jerry said that again they were putting extra problems on him, as if he didn't have enough to do. Jackson laughed and told the main character that he was the one who looked so indifferent. The man is a good person at heart, so don't let him worry. He explained to Jerry that Noah would be his partner from now on, but that he should first choose art for the 9th grade. The guy bowed before Jackson and immediately obeyed his order, after which they headed into the yard with the main character. The bright sun was shining outside and the green grass was pleasing to the eye. The guy turned to the main character and said that his name was Jerry. The boy also introduced himself to him and thanked him. Jerry smiled, answering that there was nothing to thank him for, and asked to go forward. Then some bloody monster pushed through the window and hung right on it, growling angrily. Noah thought that this monster had forgotten the Jing in the building. He became wary, not understanding what was happening. Then Jerry turned in his direction and explained that it was a ghostly face. Dan is having fun creating evil spirits, even if he doesn't pay attention to it. Noah asked whether such a low technique as creating ghosts was not witchcraft. People from the night department of Jingli do this anyway. Jerry replied that this magic can be done, but this method is the fastest to achieve. In Jing, they only look at the results, not the process, so they don't care about these useless rules. The main character thought that he had secret witchcraft techniques, and he could openly use them in the future. He really likes the way the Jing Night Division operates. After which, Jerry brought the boy to some room and explained to Brother Noah that this was a storage facility. The guy said that all the equipment of 9 classes are located in this room. Noah thought that the jade pendant allowed him to absorb the chi of ghosts, so with it, he should be able to cultivate both martial arts. Since this is the case, he will choose one technique each, fire sword and yin chakra. He thought there was something in it. Jerry was very surprised that Brother Noah was going to choose the dual cultivation path. To which the boy replied that he just wanted to practice. Jerry said that he understood everything. Since Brother Noah has finished choosing, he will take him to the room so that the boy can rest. After which, he put his hand on his head and said that there were a lot of tasks in the last days, so you need to stock up on strength. The main character asked the boy when they usually have missions in the night department of Jing. Jerry, looking at the boy with interest, answered him that who knows. But tomorrow these missions will definitely be there. Night fell. A thin bright moon shone in the sky. The stars around were twinkling brightly, illuminating the small houses. The old man was opening some doors, holding some kind of decanter in his hand. He was very upset and angry, because he had lost everything again. Opening the door, he saw a woman sitting with her back, sitting on her knees and eating something greedily. The man shouted, asking what the damn woman was eating in the middle of the night, and he asked why she was scaring him here. The grandmother, sitting with her back to the man, said that she was very hungry and could not help herself. Then the man exclaimed that she was so hungry, let him eat and just let him sleep. When the woman turned around, her mouth was completely covered in blood, and she explained to him again that she was really very hungry. And looking at the man, she said that he looked very tasty. She was covered in blood. Instead of nails, there were long sharp claws on her hands. The man was very scared. Streams of sweat were running down his face. His lips trembled in horror. He realized that it was some kind of demon. A terrible scream was heard from inside the room. Outside, the birds perked up and scattered from that place as far as possible. And then the next day came. On the street near the house, there were men with weapons in their hands. One of the passers-by asked what happened to old Chen's house. It's early morning. There are so many guards hanging around here. The second replied that he did not know what happened. Meanwhile, the main character and Jerry were approaching this house. They were also armed. Jerry told Brother Noah that he was downright unlucky to have encountered a mission just a few days after his arrival, to which the main character replied that this is even for the better. He will be able to get to know the Night Division early. Going inside the house where the old man was just yesterday, someone said that it was very cruel. Jerry bowed to the two brothers and asked if this night incident was the work of evil spirits. The brothers of the Dark Wars, the Defenders, responded that at first glance, this looks like a mass murder. But the view is so terrible that a person is simply not capable of such a thing. Jerry immediately became upset and, looking with a sad look, asked if everything was really that bad. After which he rushed inside because he would really like to see what picture could shock the two brothers. One of the brothers exclaimed that if he feels sick, he should go out and vomit, but not spoil anything there. Jerry told his brother not to worry about it. He said that he had been a Dark Warrior protector for a long time. Could there really be anything that he hadn't seen? After which the boy went inside and began to see what happened there. His eyes immediately widened. The boy began to pour out sweat. After which he could not stand it, and, before he had time to go outside, he vomited everything he had eaten today. Closing his eyes, he bowed his head and sadly asked what it could be. The main character also entered the room. Not even one muscle on his body flinched. He was as hard as a stone. The boy approached the corpse and touched the pool of blood near the dead body with his finger. After which he rubbed the blood between his fingers, sniffing it while thinking about something. It was a very terrible sight. The body was completely torn to pieces. It was as if he had simply been eaten alive. Nearby was another torn body. One of the brothers noticed and said it out loud that the main character saw this and didn't even flinch. He was very surprised and told the main character that he was not behaving at all like a newcomer. Then Noah asked him how they died. The boy turned to the main character. How calm he was too, but streams of sweat flowed down his cheeks. He explained that the man who was there had been bitten to death. They simply tore him into small pieces, leaving him lying bloody, and the woman died from overeating. He thinks this means that it was she who overate, tearing this man to pieces. The second brother said that evil spirits were clearly at work here, and asked Jerry to try to check for traces of yin. One of the brothers explained to Noah that Jerry was a chi practitioner, and knew several auxiliary types of talismanic techniques. The main character looked at the boy and said that he understood everything, after which Jerry picked up some kind of yellow glowing card. He closed his eyes, and the yellow talisman sparkled with a bright fiery light. It was the dragon's aspiration talisman. The boy began to control this dragon, releasing it from the yellow talisman. The dragon rose as if this card had turned into him. He began to fly around them, approaching the dead bodies, after which the dragon flew back to him, passing something. Jerry asked what it was, and then he understood. He exclaimed that there really was an aura of evil spirits in the house, but the ghost itself did not inhabit the body, but only affected the mind. But now the aura has almost dissipated, so it is impossible to track. One of the brothers said that if everything is like this, then this is a problem. Where will they now find this lurking ghost? The main character said that he has an idea, but he doesn't know if it's true. Then the brothers became interested and asked him to speak, and they would think together. Noah said the woman must have gone somewhere to attract the ghost, and finding out the woman's whereabouts might lead to some clues. Jerry replied that this woman must have been in many places, so it would be difficult to pinpoint. Noah agreed with him, explaining that he therefore needed to test his second method. The main character asked one of the brothers if there had been other people at the door lately, who also died from overeating. Then the guy turned to Noah and explained to him that exactly as he said, there were several more cases. The main character exclaimed that he knew so. His gaze was filled with interest and great intelligence. It was not for nothing that he asked such a smart and necessary question. He asked Jerry to bring him a map, to which the guy, opening his eyes wide, was very surprised and asked what he needed it for. The main character explained that he needed the map in order to naturally find the demon. After all, the boy had a plan in his head. Then the boy exclaimed what he had found. In front of us is the bright Kangping Street. Today was a sunny, warm day again. Jerry noticed that Brother Noah was really good. He immediately identified the location. To which the boy replied that it was just a little trick, and that's all. Having revealed the card, Noah said that these people who died from overeating may not have eaten people, but he thinks that it was the demon who brought them to death. I'll plot the trajectory of these people's movements in the form of lines. He looked at exactly where their routes intersect, and that's where the demon should be. The boy understood a lot from this map. After which, he thought a little, and remembered one event. That beggar who sat in the gateway on a thin old mat. A picture appeared before his gaze that he had already seen before. There was some kind of vessel in front of him, and the boy understood that something was wrong with this man. Or maybe not a person. In front of us is a huge, bright building. The main character approached this building looking for someone. Jerry explained to the main character that all the people had already left, to which Noah replied that it was very good, they did a good job. The guys, along with their two brothers, had already approached the beggar Noah remembered. He looked very menacingly and attentively at the unexpected guests. Indeed, he was somehow strange and completely unsociable. Jerry wondered if this beggar was the ghostly creature they were looking for. Noah said that this is not a beggar. He is not to blame for anything, but the pot is in his hands, which he guards and holds all the time. And then he glanced at this pot in the beggar's hands. The elder brother asked his comrades why they were all frozen in place. We stopped dead in our tracks, because it was better to take part in this adventure. And he invited his students to go say hello to this person, or not a person, pushing them to the next exploits, of course quite dangerous, but interesting. When the guy came close to the beggar, he asked the gentleman to lend him some food, and he pointed to his empty pot. He was waiting for the man to throw him at least a piece of some food there. Some kind of stench seemed to come out of this vessel. A really dark haze was rising up, but not everyone could see it. The guy promised the beggar to give him some rice later, but let him first show him the pot he was holding in his hands. The old man immediately grabbed him as tightly as possible and exclaimed that they would not let him eat. They just wanted to deprive him of his treasure. They are just like those other people. After which the old man shouted, his face completely changed, that they deserved to die. He became very nervous and made inhuman sounds, which already indicated that he was not entirely human. The main character thought that it was not very good what would happen now. Thick black smoke began to come out of the ghost man's mouth. Little by little, the old man began to show his true essence and image, after which he began to writhe all over like a zombie. Instead of teeth, he had sharp, eerie fangs, and his eyes glowed with a red fiery light. The brothers shouted to everyone to be careful, so as not to lose vigilance and be on the alert. Everyone was on guard in anticipation of an attack by a monster, a subhuman. The old man began to turn into a terrible demon. It didn't look like a zombie, but like a terrible bloodthirsty monster. Although they no longer knew which of them was worse. There was danger from both of them. This one was even something worse than both of them. He was simply ugly with a second mouth on his stomach, and as long as 5 people, he looked like a giant. His head tilted disgustingly to the side as if his neck had been twisted. and the eyes were red and completely bulging. It feels like they are about to jump out of their orbits. After which, he fell on all fours, as his arms and legs turned into paws with huge, twisted, sharp claws. The monster began to look like some kind of evil, vile spider standing on its crooked legs. He opened his vile mouth and began screaming with a menacing roar towards his comrades. Some kind of purple, transparent smoke emanated from his vile mouth. Jerry exclaimed that this creature seemed very strong. He looks like a 7th-level spirit. He just felt it in his gut. The demon, not yet having time to approach them, stretched out his vile long arm. It became like rubber. And she reached out to the warriors standing in front. He reached out with that hand straight towards them. The brothers asked everyone to move back, as it was too dangerous. It was absolutely necessary to retreat. One of the brothers began to apply the secret teaching of the white bone. He released the strong bone shield from his hands, and the vile hand of the creature began to reach out to meet him, pushing him back as hard as he could. He was really very strong, so some kind of plan was needed to defeat him as quickly as possible. The boy completely curled up and flew far to the side. He fell to one knee and asked everyone else to pay attention. The second brother put his fist to his fist, after which some incredible power began to emanate from his hands in the form of a dark haze. He did not want to stand aside, but was also ready to attack the monster. He jumped in the air as high as possible to reach the demon and asked to taste his powerful blow. But the guy's strength turned out to be not so perfect against this terrible monster. He began to fall from above, and the vile creature laughed at him. His laugh was very nasty and evil. Then the boy's brother began to use his abilities. He crossed his arms and revealed the secret teaching of the white bone. He used the power of the bone chain, and hitting the ground with his fists, everything around was illuminated with bright blue rays, like lightning, after which these lightning bolts turned into long bone chains, at the ends of which there were seemingly fingers with long, sharp claws. This power was quite terrifying. At some point, they overtook the paws of the vile creature and wrapped them as if in chains. The demon began to squeal, bulging his creepy eyes. He was captured by these bone chains. Jerry, in turn, held in his hand several yellow pieces of paper covered in blood. These were his talismans. They glowed with a fiery red-yellow light. The boy, closing his eyes as if meditating, whispered something and then used his power, spreading these talismans in front of the monster. The demon really began to scream with an eerie cry when the seal appeared above his head, a vile fanged mouth. He hunched over and made terrible, angry roars. Jerry gave the command to the monster to fall quickly. He was very angry and wanted to deal with this monster as quickly as possible. However, like everyone else, he was twisted and his muzzle ended up on the very ground. He pressed his head completely down as if he was glued to it, but the paws remained firmly on the ground. After which, the guy asked Brother Noah to quickly turn on his strength using his sword. After all, we had to strike while the iron was hot. Otherwise, if they stall for time, it will work against them. Then the main character jumped up as high as possible and grabbed his fiery sword. He was already approaching the demon, taking his sword out of its sheath. Noah accelerated, and with all his might, flying in the air as high as possible, and flying as close to him as possible, he thrust the fiery sword right into the neck of the terrible monster. Jerry thought that he had succeeded, but one of the brothers replied that not everything was as simple as he thought. The main character noticed that the monster had a very strong body. Streams of sweat ran down his face. The monster was too strong and seemed impenetrable. It felt like he had some kind of armor instead of a body. The demon looked at the boy and immediately laughed. His gaze was full of madness and anger. He was overly confident in his abilities, and he made it clear to the main character and the others that he would not give up. His neck began to stretch out, and his mouth opened wider and wider in a vile, disgusting smile. He rose as high as possible above Noah. The monster looked scarier and scarier. The main character looked at the monster and thought what else it was. After all, this monster seemed to have mutated, turning into some kind of creepier, formidable monster. Looking at him, the boy thrust his sharp, huge sword into his mutated body harder and harder. He looked at his face, which completely began to change. A long, rough, blistered tongue emerged from the vile mouth. This tongue was several meters long and very thick, like a branch from a tree. He reached out, approaching him. He had terrible blisters like a poisonous toad. The main character felt incredible power emanating from this demonic monster. She pushed him several meters away from the demon, and the boy landed on one knee. The monster growled again with a wild roar and stretched out to its full height. He even tore off the bone chains with which he had been bound before. Now he was completely free, and nothing interfered with his movements. The brothers asked him to be careful, since the yin power of this demon had increased significantly. Sweat was running down their faces. They were very worried. Not the right word. They were in great mortal danger. Well, no one wanted to die from the clutches of this evil spirit. Jerry was surprised what this hunger demon of theirs really was. Their surprise knew no bounds. The boy's eyes shone with trepidation. He stood right in front of the monster, and the main character asked him to quickly dodge the blow. After all, the demon raised his vile paw to attack, and then suddenly some bright lightning force knocked off the demon's paw. He was surprised when some guy hit his paw with a sword. It was a very daring and bold blow. The boy exclaimed that they should not tense up and stuck this sword as deep as possible into his body. Apparently he succeeded, since the monster was in pain. The guy exclaimed that he would definitely deal with this demon and raised and pulled out his sword again over his head. The brothers recognized this guy as Mr. Samuel. They were very happy to see him. After all, for them this was a chance for salvation and victory over this terrible, lousy monster. Samuel was able to cut off the hand of the formidable monster with his sword, after which he himself flew down, and the demon screamed with a terrible roar of wild pain and anger. He became even more frantic and wild. Jerry, looking at what was happening, exclaimed that this guy is really cool. He looked at him in admiration, and I was amazed at his abilities. The main character asked the guy if he was offended, to which Jerry replied that he was fine. Since Mr. Samuel is here, they can at least drink tea. But everything was not as simple as they thought. After the guy jumped back, he landed on one knee. I pressed both hands on the ground, and the monster continued to rage. The guy, having gained strength, again flew up to him as close as possible, exposing his saber. He was also full of rage and madness. He began to further cut his hand into pieces, after which it turned out to wound his body. Bright scarlet blood finally sprayed out everywhere from all the cuts. No one noticed that Mr. Samuel's sword was moving very quickly, as expected of a 7th grade martial artist. Jerry exclaimed that Mr. Samuel is the fastest swordsman in Henyang province. This demon can't do anything against him. But the monster was too angry, and putting its second paw forward, it tried to attack the guy. The guy, in turn, hit him with his sword, but he was thrown to the side. Then Jerry opened his big eyes in surprise. Then he became seriously scared. He began to sweat even more. The main character thought that Samuel had every chance of becoming useless in this battle. After all, the guy began to fight the enemy very deftly. Well, it was obvious that the monster was much stronger than him. Then one of the brothers told Mr. Samuel that he would help him, and began to use his skills again. He again applied the secret teaching, but this time not with chains, but with a bone spear. And he began to attack, trying to pierce the monster with his huge iron spear. But it was not to be. The demonic monster grabbed this spear with its long, nasty tongue, so that it did not have time to reach him. The brother was very surprised because even this power did not help him deal with the demon, who, in turn, looked at him menacingly, throwing his weapon to the side. Here, streams of someone's power, reflecting white transparent light, rolled like wheels, emitting a powerful sound, towards a huge demon, after which his disgusting long tongue was simply cut off in half, and the part that held the spear flew away along with it, falling to the ground. This was done very professionally and skillfully. The demonic monster howled with a terrible wild cry, being left without half of its long, creepy tongue and a piece of its paw. He roared in wild pain, increasingly filled with a thirst for revenge and reprisals against his offenders. It was Samuel. He stood in a fighting stance with a bright, sparkling sword in his hand. His gaze was full of courage and confidence. He also had no intention of giving in to this monster. The demonic monster howled again with a terrible roar. His bloody tongue dangled like a piece of meat in his mouth, filling his mouth with blood. The main character thought, looking at what was happening, that now was a great moment. He was alert and ready to attack, after which he began to use his power, namely, the cursed hand of a dead man. He grabbed the burning sword with both hands and jumped up. On one side, Samuel was holding a sword. On the other, he was flying up to a menacing, vile monster. The main character began to use the song of the fire sword, and Samuel has the power of the ice blade. And so their two forces united from different sides, piercing the demonic monster. He could not resist two of the strongest warriors. A lot of scarlet blood gushed out. The guys cut off the neck of the vile monster, cutting it into several parts, each of the guys with his own sword. The two brothers looked at what was happening with very surprised eyes. It was an eerie, incredible sight. Both guys were too strong and brave. From the outside, it was a beautiful battle, although very frightening. The demonic monster was defeated. His body fell exhausted to the ground, and the head was lying separately in a pool of blood. The main character, coming closer, said that the missions of the Night Division were really dangerous. If he wasn't careful now, he could have been killed. Some kind of thick black smoke emanated from the head of the demonic monster. Very negative bad energy emanated from him. This smoke entered his amulet in a thin stream. It was as if he was attracting this black haze into himself, sucking him inside. The boy thought that this was the power obtained from killing the hunger demon again. It seems like there are two flows of power. One is the yin power stored in his channels, and the other is strengthening his physical body. Samuel, looking at the boy, said that the thunder of a brave warrior is the 8th level of internal training. Jerry then approached Noah and congratulated him on reaching level 8. But the main character told him that it was a happy accident. Mr. Samuel told the two brothers that they were responsible for completing the work. The brothers immediately obeyed and bowed before him. Samuel, leaving the room, glanced at the main character and said that he would go with him. The boy replied that as the master orders, and now they have already left the large building. Coming out of the gate, Samuel began a conversation with the main character. He noticed something different in him, something that was not there in others. He said that he thought the boy was no different from these offspring, but he was wrong. Without him today, we would have to suffer losses. Noah replied that Mr. Samuel himself could easily deal with this demon. The gentleman said that the boy found out where the hunger demon was and killed him, so he will receive great credit for this operation. He will later report this to the Jing department, and for this, he will be given the highest assessment of his achievements. Noah thanked Mr. Samuel warmly. Well, the man said that Noah had risen to the 8th level of internal training. So when there is time, you need to look into the Jing and choose 2 more techniques. Noah replied that he understood everything. The boy thought that Mr. Samuel was truly a sincere person. Working under his leadership should not cause any problems. And I have to teach him a lot. And now 3 more days have passed. In front of us is a thin, clean street along which people are walking. Bright, bright day. Jerry told the main character that they have been patrolling here for 3 days after the incident with the hungry demon, and everything is fine. Noah replied that if nothing else happens today, patrolling the streets can be ended. Then, Jerry remembered something, and asked the boy what techniques he had chosen for himself. He was very interested in where the boy would start. The main character explained that he chose the Bone Purification Treatise and the Golden Light Seal to suppress demons. Jerry exclaimed that the Bone Purification Treatise could provide the basis for inner strength, and the Golden Light Seal for suppressing demons would help deal with cultivators. He noticed that this combination was really good. He said that Brother Noah is so gifted and works so hard that Samuel is already impressed. Jerry told him he was too modest. He, unlike others, likes to sleep in brothels. It's just a dream. Why should it cost money? To which the main character explained to the boy that he is still young. He will know these things when he gets older. Jerry noticed that something was happening in the crowd not far from them, as some noise was heard. Noah suggested he go take a look. Some man told the seller that he was too petty, because he even squeezed a pear for him. To which the guy replied that he was just a small trader, so he asked him not to create problems. Then the man exclaimed that, so be it, but if he does not give him the pear, he will grow it himself. He was very angry, and did not stop raising his voice at the boy. Then he grabbed the vessel in his hands and opened the lid. There was a sound like a bottle being uncorked. Some liquid immediately spilled out of this vessel. She fell on rocky soil, after which a sprout appeared from it and a huge tree began to grow. The man exclaimed that the merchant was a stingy man, but he, in turn, was not. And he asked people to come and take as many pears as they wanted. When the merchant approached his counter, he immediately noticed that there was not a single fruit left on it that he was selling. Then the guy fell to his knees looking at a huge tree with pears and cried tearfully. He mourned his pears, which had disappeared. The merchant fell to his knees and began to cry that he had to sell these pears to pay for his mother's treatment. After all, the guy had nothing to live on, and his mother was too sick. He didn't have enough money. The man who poured the liquid from this vessel said that let this be a lesson to him, so that he would not be so stingy in the future. Jerry exclaimed that this monk was simply terrible and wanted to go forward. But the main character stopped him and asked him not to worry because he would teach him a lesson. Noah said something. This is their territory. How dare he, the old stump, behave so brazenly? The man immediately turned in his direction. Noah asked if he realized his mistake to return the pears to the man and disappear from here. The man, twisting himself into a malicious smile, asked if he had any complaints about what he was doing great. The man with great impudence called himself great. The main character took out his sword, and putting it to the man's neck, asked how he dares to call himself great in his presence. It seems to him that his grandfather is tired of living. If everything is so serious, he can help him with this. The boy's menacing gaze simply pierced this impudent man. Noah said that he had a suspicion that this idiot was connected with dark forces. Therefore, he asked him to go with him to the Jing Division to clarify this point. The man laughed and said that he thought what kind of mongrels were hanging around here, but it turned out to be people from Jing. He completely underestimated them and behaved shamelessly and indeed very arrogantly. The main character got angry, knitted his eyebrows and said that insulting the people of the Night Division is another violation. The boy continued to stand holding the sword in his hands, and the man accelerated, preparing to rush towards him to attack. The man grabbed the yellow talismans in both hands and asked if they wanted to condemn him. Is the baby strong enough to do this? Using his talismans, which glowed with purple light, he called upon the diamond priest to protect him. Jerry, frightened, opened his huge eyes and asked his brother Noah what was happening. Everything happened completely unexpectedly. The man began to change, as if he had turned into a transparent blue cloud. His appearance was completely blue. I emit some strange negative energy. After which, stretching out to his full height, the blue man took some sharp transparent object in his hand and laughed, and said that now the Great One would teach the dogs a couple of lessons. Jerry told brother Noah that this Taoist priest was not easy to deal with and asked permission to help him. The boy replied that it was not necessary. This is just a show-off witchcraft technique. You shouldn't even be afraid of it.
Then the man screamed with a wild cry that this was an ignorant servant, and he threatened that now he had agreed.
The menacing man lit up with bright white rays and began to approach closer and closer to the main character, after which he used force, destroying everything around. But the boy managed to jump away, dodging and rose into the air. He flew right above the head of that blue monster and began to use a secret technique. He quickly reacted to the man's transformation into a blue monster. Waving his hand and raising his sword upward, he used the Song of the Fire Sword, after which he broke. Everything around the boy lit up with a bright fiery light, and the man was thrown to the side by this strong explosion and fell to the ground with a roar. The boy hit him very well. Jerry exclaimed to brother Noah to be careful. Some kind of sharp whip was flying towards him. She was enveloped in a bright blue haze. It resembled some incredibly sharp peak when it straightened up. The main character felt something approaching him. He immediately became alert when he heard this strange sound. The boy managed to dodge in time, and a powerful blow from a hard whip hit the wall behind him, breaking it into small pieces. Noah looked menacingly at his opponent. He noticed that the man was using a sneaky trick. Then the man pulled out his sharp whip from the strong wall and realized that he had failed. He asked the main character not to dare to underestimate him. And the boy, in turn, began to use the broken sword technique. Everything around was on fire. The man, through the bright flames of the fire, threw his strong, long whip of destruction towards Noah. The boy's force threw him aside like lightning. A fiery ray in the form of a snake chewed the man's hand, after which he fell with a crash to the floor. The man then jumped to his feet, his hand covered in blood. He wondered where the dark warriors of the defenders had such incredible strength. The main character asked the man if he still had a brain in place, to stop resisting and go with him. The man began to use his nasty tricks again and exclaimed that if he couldn't win, he didn't plan to give up, after which some kind of explosion, flames of fire and clouds of smoke occurred around him. Some kind of black, gloomy smoke enveloped everything around. The man seemed to be cloned. He was not only on the ground but also on the roof. He laughed evilly, or one of his clones did. The man exclaimed from the roof that he was real. His clone sat next to him and shouted that no, he was the real one. They asked to catch him. Jerry asked the main character what they would do now. Noah replied that they would try to find out which of them was real. Then the boy decided to use one more of his tricks. He began to summon his spiritual demon, which just then appeared in a violet bright light. The little demon instantly rushed towards the man and immediately grabbed his chest. He was small and mean. The man began to scream, and the demon tried to tear the clothes on his chest to grab the skin. But for some reason he couldn't do it. Apparently it was still a clone, and not a real man. Meanwhile, a bright yellow flame was blazing below. One of the clones looked from the roof to the ground. The man twisted his face into a nasty, menacing grin. He still didn't want to give up. And the little demon flew to the ground after hitting it. A piece of clothing from his opponent's shirt fluttered in his mouth. so it was a clone. Noah, looking at the roof of the house, told the old man that he was very funny, still using the same childhood tricks. The man began to run along the roof, accelerating. The main characters asked if he wanted to escape, and decided to go in pursuit of him. He exclaimed that he simply had nowhere to run. Together with Jerry, they pulled out their swords and rushed after the man with all their might. Then, with the sound of the wind, a sharp saber blade appeared in a bright blue light. It flew with a loud whistle right above the man's head and stuck into a strong, powerful wall. It almost hit him. The man covered his head with his hands but continued to run after that, leaving only dust behind him. Jerry, looking in his direction, concluded that he was very nimble. The guys remained looking in his direction. Jerry told the main character, leaning slightly towards him, that this Taoist might be a member of the Luo cult. The boy was very surprised after his words. Could this really be possible? Luo, White Lotus, and Maitreya are the three main cults of the Great Qian Kingdom, located in the north and south of the country. The three sects are a mixture of Buddhist and Taoist secret techniques passed down from generation to generation. They are strong in the use of illusions, which, although they do not kill, can shake the consciousness and confuse anyone. In order to prevent the three cults from disturbing the peace of the Great Qian Kingdom, 500 years ago, the government took the initiative to send troops to Liu Tian and stop them. The first of the three cults, Luo, disappeared without a trace after that. However, in recent years, there have been signs of a revival of these three cults. The guys have already returned to where their school was. A beautiful, spacious building with a sign in the middle. Noah said that Eastern Lin County is in the central part of Qian, and is not included in the Luo sphere of influence. Why then would they show up here? Jerry explained that if Brother Noah couldn't understand, then neither could he. We must first tell Mr. Samuel about this. And so, opening the door to the room, Jerry exclaimed to the gentleman that they had already returned. He was very pleased, and smiled sweetly, but then his smile disappeared from his face. He directed his alarmed gaze directly at the guy. The man was sitting on a chair, wounded. His right arm and chest were completely bandaged. Bright scarlet blood showed through the bandage. Jerry asked what happened to Mr. Samuel. Who inflicted this wound on him? Samuel explained that they had received information that a disciple who had escaped from the Luo sect had arrived here. So he and Commander Benjamin set up an ambush to capture him. They waited for the enemy for a very long time, but, to his surprise, he was so strong that he managed to break through their encirclement and seriously wounded him. But he also received the violet ray from Commander Benjamin. It went through the body, burning the heart. So now he must hide in Luo County to heal his wounds. An order came from above. If they can kill this Luo cult rebel, they will be rewarded with 100 merit points and 2 bottles of medicine. If they can catch him alive, the reward will be doubled. The main character noticed that the reward was even greater than for the hunger demon. It seems that this rebel is very important. Jerry told Mr. Samuel that he and his brother Noah had just found a Taoist of the Luo cult, but the man had escaped. Samuel thought for a moment and said that perhaps they were also looking for the traitor Luo. He feels like they need to hurry up. One of the brothers said that Luo County is so big that 20 or so people from the Jing Division will not be easy to find someone who is hiding well. Samuel said that this is true, and it is so. But if they hesitate too long, the traitor will surely recover and escape. The main character, thinking, said that he had an idea that could work. Then Mr. Samuel asked him to report. The boy began to explain that there are definitely underground guilds in Luo County, with the help of statuses in the night department. Can you raise them or not? He asked Mr. Samuel. Samuel replied that it was a good idea. With their numbers and experience, they have a better chance of finding the Luo cult traitor than them. Samuel told one of the brothers that he knew these people, so he could take on this with Noah, and the rest will help them. The guy immediately obeyed. Then the main character asked Brother Newt how many underground guilds there were in Luo County, and which ones can help them. Newt explained that there are quite a few large and not so large guilds in Luo County, but the only worthy one is the Blue Flower clan. Blue Flower controls the underground games and brothels of Luo County. The head of the Dark Dagger Hall, Bim, is responsible for the latter. This man suffered a lower body injury at an early age when he fought with someone, and as a result became somewhat strange. Eric is the deputy head of the Blue Flower Guild. This man is a strong fighter, and is second only to Bim in prestige in the Blue Flower. Bim trusts this man so much that he left all matters related to the gambling business to him. He considers him to be his brother, and treats you with great respect and trust. These two are not weak, but they will not offend the Luo cult because of them. Even if outwardly they agree with them, one cannot be sure that they will really help with the search. The main character, Thoughtful, said that in this case it would be problematic if they deliberately stalled for time. We need to come up with a safe way. The boy asked Newt if he knew how strange that man Bim was. Then for some reason Newt hesitated a little and, closing his eyes, said that he was a little embarrassed to tell them about this. The main character and Jerry were very surprised and wondered why he was embarrassed. They all became quite interested. Moreover, they needed to know this for the common cause. It was imperative to figure everything out and come up with some kind of plan. Let's move to a slightly different dimension. In front of us is a blue flower training ground. A man picked up a heavy barbell. He practiced calmly without noticing what was happening around him. He took a heavy breath before lifting her off the ground. Droplets of sweat flowed down the guy's face as he tried to regain his breathing. After which, with a sharp jerk, he concentrated and lifted the heavy barbell from the ground. He did this several times in a row, sparing no effort. By training your will and body. While he was training, a girl in a red robe with a large red fan was watching him. She looked at him admiringly, without taking her eyes off his pumped-up body. She began watching the boy a long time ago. He did not immediately notice someone's gaze directed at him. The man immediately became wary and glanced at this woman with a red fan. At first he couldn't understand anything. The woman said, turning to the man, noticing that lately the deputy's body has been getting stronger and stronger. The main character and Jerry listened very carefully, sweating profusely. They tried to get the gist of the guy's story. Newt explained that Bim constantly hinted at Eric, throwing lewd glances at him. But Eric did not pay any attention to him. Noah, thoughtfully, lowered his head down and said that he did not expect that Bim would have this kind of addiction. Newt replied that Eric's subordinates are lucky, but of course not so much. Many of them suffered at the hands of Bim. The woman asked why he was crying. She said that he would be held responsible. Newt's brother exclaimed that unfortunately Eric is also an excellent fighter, who was unlucky with such a leader. The main character thought again, finally opening his eyes, but without removing his hands from his chin. They all slowly began to understand what was going on. Of course, he guessed what kind of addictions Eric had. He asked why then they didn't push the boat downstream and do Eric a favor. Then Samuel asked how he was going to do this. What kind of plan came into his head? Despite the fact that it seems that Eric and Bim live in peace and harmony, in reality, Eric certainly harbors a grudge in his soul. If the Night Division lights the fire in time, the two will definitely quarrel. Jerry said he understood. If they help Eric deal with Bim, then he will become more favorable, since he will be in debt to the Night Division. And when the time comes, they will ask him to help find the rebels of the Luo cult. Then he will not be able to refuse them. The main character looked at the boy and agreed with him. He understood Noah's whole plan. Samuel said that of course this is all good, but how is he going to light this fire? Noah glanced at Jerry and said that in this case, he would need his help. The boy, dripping with sweat, was very surprised that the main character chose him. Why did he think he was suitable for this role? Well, probably because he's too cute for a guy. It's nighttime. The streets are illuminated and people are walking along the main street. It's already late. Everyone is resting as best they can after work. The girls, looking out the window, smile at passers-by and call their uncle to play. They are all looking out of the windows of the brothel. The woman, Bim, sat sadly thinking about something. She rested her hand on her chin and continued to dream. She was lying on a small sofa and a man was kneeling in front of her. Another passion of the boy. He clenched his fists. He was all wet and seemed to be trying to say something but froze in place without saying a word. Then a strong, powerful blow flew towards him straight in the face. Bim hit him in the face with his foot and asked what was wrong with his face, as if he was mourning someone. After this, Bim was very upset, because they all just laugh at him. No one is sincere. And he asked this man to get out of here. He immediately obeyed and started running. He ran as fast as he could through the open door, apparently glad that he was kicked out of there. He didn't want to become another victim of this man's love. The man almost hit a girl who was heading in the direction from which he had come. She went specifically to Bim. Bim bowed his head and became even more sad and thought that none of these scum was being sincere with him. He was too upset and realized that there was absolutely no one to trust in this life. He felt deceived and alone. The girl who came into the guy's room asked the head of the room if he would come in and have a look, since there was some kind of eccentric outside. The guy knitted his eyebrows and asked what kind of eccentric he was, and thoughtfully decided to take a look. Suddenly something will finally change in his life, and he will meet the one he has been looking for so long. At this time, the situation was happening below. The dim light against the backdrop of red curtains and lanterns created an intimate atmosphere. Two girls whispered while in this room to each other. They apparently noticed the guys sitting at the next table, and they were already thinking about how to approach them. Jerry, dressed as a girl, asked the main character for a drink and poured him something from a jug. Noah thanked Madam for her kindness. Immediately a woman came up to them and asked if this was not their first time. She offered to prepare for them some of the best girls in their house. The main character asked if she was blind, if she couldn't see that he had already come with someone, pointing to the girl sitting next to him. Then this girl looked at the guy in fear. She was seriously scared, as she immediately began to sweat, after which the guy asked her to calm down, because they still couldn't do without her silver, and he extended his hand towards her. Bim approached the table, dressed as a girl. He asked the officer not to be angry, since his subordinates were narrow-minded people, and he explained that if the guest is dissatisfied, he will definitely take his side, and then they will bring him their sincere apologies. The main character replied that it didn't matter to him, but it upset his companion. Jerry, in turn, chuckled offended, and Bim, raising his fan to his face, looked at Noah with interest, and to the girl who was next to him. But he looked at her with envy and some kind of contempt. She said that she didn't understand a little, since he's an officer who's not into women. Then what is he doing in his brothel? Jerry pressed himself close to the main character, and Noah replied that there is no need to think. This is all so that his companion learns new tricks. The guy, in turn, listened to all these phrases with disgust, and the disguised Bim, looking at the main character, thought that he was very obedient. Then the boy put the mug of tea on the table and began to explain to the man with the fan. What he doesn't know is that before this he was also a normal man, and he was not obedient at all. He just did a little trick to make him what he looks like now. Streams of sweat flowed down Bim's face. He said that he would like to hear the details. It was obvious that the guy liked the main character. He took the bait. Then the main character laughed and replied that for his sincerity, he would tell everything. And here in front of us is a large, bright building with closed iron gates. A healthy guy who was sitting at the table held a mug of tea in his hands and asked if they were serious. The main character and Newt stood in front of him. Newt explained that when he came to a brothel to have fun, he accidentally heard that Bim wanted to give him poison, which could turn him into a weak-willed slave, obeying him. He told brother Eric that he had come to tell him about this, since he was a well-known person in Lutian. And so, he could not watch how he was openly insulted. Then the man asked Newt's brother not to joke about such things. He looked at him from under his brows. Brother Newt asked how he could joke about something like that. After all, his friend was also there and heard it. He can confirm his words. Noah immediately bowed down to Eric and said that every word said by brother Newt was true. His name is Noah. His parents gave him this name so that in the future, he would remain faithful and honest to his word all his life. If there is even a drop of lies in the words he said earlier, then let him be thundered right in this place. Turning slightly towards the main character, Newt thought that he was not worthy to bear the name given to him by his parents. At this time, the employees told the bus that knowing Bim, one could really believe that he would use such a vile method against him. Their brothers have already received his tea with poison, but there is no way he can be subjected to this humiliation. Then another one of Eric's men approached. Bowing before the boss, he said that he wanted to report. He explained that the deputy head of the hall had prepared the dining table and was asking him to appear alone at his residence for a conversation. Lewis replied that he understood everything and would come now. The man who came with the report explained that this insignificant person took the first step. The main character exclaimed that thus he was going to act tonight. The head is still burning with impatience. Eric began to think what he should do. Streams of sweat ran down his cheeks. He was seriously scared. One of the warriors pointed towards the guy and said that this hermaphrodite would ride them and suffer on their heads. As long as you can tolerate this, it's time to deal with this person. Then Eric slammed his fist on the table, causing sparks to fly all around. Now he was full of hatred and despair. He was very angry. To this very Bim, surely something had to be done. After all, how could a man act this way? He considered him his friend, suspecting nothing. At this time, brother Newt looked at the main character as if asking what to do next. He was very serious and thoughtful. After which Newt told his brother Eric that the Night Division had not liked Bim's behavior for a long time. Therefore, he will be able to ask them for help if he needs it. After which Eric asked them to help him in this case. He didn't stop getting angry and hitting the table with his fist. And now the main character and his brother Newt were already leaving the room, satisfied with the implementation of their plan. Everything turned out much better than they thought. We return again to Bim's residence. There were very cozy red glowing lanterns hanging right along the corridor. In the room, in front of a set table with a bottle containing some kind of liquid, the owner of the residence was sitting. After sitting for a while in thought, the man began to open the cap of this bottle. He remembered how Noah handed him the medicine and explained it. What is this medicine called docile powder? He will add a little bit of it to his loved one's food, and all his life he will be determinedly and irrevocably opposed to his past feelings towards him. Then Bim opened the lid of this vessel and poured the contents into the decanter standing next to him on the table. After closing his eyes, Bim asked the deputy head of the hall not to blame him, since he loves him too much. Then the man heard a sound outside the door. Someone suddenly knocked. He became thoughtful and wary. Bim asked to come in, and now the man was already climbing the steps towards him. It was the deputy head of the hall. He went into Mr. Beam's room and greeted him. He was worried, but didn't show his emotions yet. The man was surprised that the deputy head of the hall actually came to him. He asked him not to be shy and to sit down quickly. The deputy immediately sat down at the table and looked at Bim very suspiciously. Eric was very angry. He was seething with indignation. I can barely contain myself. Bim asked the deputy head of the hall whether he was thirsty after the journey, and pouring wine from a vessel, he offered to moisten his throat. It was wine mixed with the potion that he had in another vessel. The man took a glass of wine from him and looked inside carefully. He knitted his eyebrows together in deep thought, after which, handing back the glass of wine, he said that the head of the hall had been very busy lately. He was very upset about this. So after all, he offered Bim to drink the first glass of wine. But the guy immediately laughed and put his hand to his face and lowered his eyes. He said that this was nothing, and asked the deputy head of the hall to drink wine first. Then the deputy head of the hall asked why the head of the hall was evading so much. Did he add anything to the wine? Here the head of the hall, Bim, was seriously frightened, because he added obedient powder to the vessel with wine. But he immediately pulled himself together, and began to explain that the deputy head of the hall was apparently joking with him now. Then the man slammed his fist on the table, breaking a glass of wine. He exclaimed that he wasn't even going to joke. He was patient with him in everything, but he deceives others too often. Behind the man stood two more people wearing hats. Bim began to look closely at them, after which they took these hats off their heads and threw them to the side. The main character asked Brother Lewis not to listen to this nonsense, but rather to finish with him. The head of the hall was very surprised to see Noah in front of him. He was simply shocked by this turn of events. This is what they played on him, embodying such an insidious and cunning plan. Then the main character asked if he didn't know that before dying he had to shut his mouth. I didn't wish death on the transvestite. Bim immediately exclaimed, asking Eric not to be fooled. He explained that it was not him but that scoundrel and pointed his finger at Noah. But the main character was already taking out a saber from his own. He was very confident in his actions. He wasn't going to leave it all just like that. He asked Bim not to resort to tricks in such a situation, since he would die today anyway, and began to threaten him with a sword. Eric asked him to calm down. After they finished this performance, he would leave him his undamaged corpse. Then Bim laughed and said that he understood that they had apparently been planning this for a long time. Bim, knitting his eyebrows and casting a sidelong glance at the men, said that he did not intend to die. He's not going to give up. And stretching out his hand in their direction, he began to use magic. There was some kind of power in his hand. A bright yellow light emanated from it. After which, directing this force towards the men, they recoiled a little. The guy concentrated his energy, directing it towards those who unexpectedly became opponents for him. The main character looked at Bim and said that he was also resisting. How dare he do this in his situation?
The man, with his strength, broke the round table at which they were all sitting. It just fell apart in half.
Noah prepared to attack without letting go of his sharp, shiny sword. The table flew right over their heads, breaking into pieces. After which Bim, without wasting a second, began to reach out with his hand to his sword, which was hanging attached to the wall. He grabbed the hilt of the sword, pulling it out of its sheath. The cold, sharp steel immediately sparkled with a silvery light. The man, threatening them with a sword, asked them to feel the taste of his bladed weapon. He smiled maliciously, making the others nervous. But that was not the case, after which he rushed towards the main character. Noah, in turn, began to approach him in order to repel the attack and begin the attack himself. The main character began to use the broken sword technique, and his opponent, in turn, is a dark sword and the night wind. And then their blows touched, merging somewhere in the middle. It was a powerful, menacing blow of incredible force. They managed to wound each other by lightly scratching each other on the cheek with a sword. Both of them appeared to have drops of scarlet blood running down their cheeks. Bim was about to strike the next blow to his opponent. Meanwhile, Eric was quietly getting up from his chair. He couldn't watch what was happening just by watching on the sidelines.
He clenched his strong fists and began to threaten Bim. He was already running up to him from behind, preparing to deliver a fatal blow.
But the guy began to swing his sword, which was hit by Eric's powerful fist. The guy was very strong and healthy. The training was taking its toll. Bim immediately flew back, falling to the floor. Everything was scattered around, fragments of plates and cups that were on the table. Flying back, he fixed his gaze somewhere forward, surprised at what was happening. He didn't take his eyes off it. Ahead of him was a stream of bright yellow light, which pushed him back with all his might. The guy fell on his back without letting go of his sword, but he had not yet lost control of himself and quickly got up on one knee, holding the sword tightly in his hand. He flew out the closed window, breaking it with his body. The main character asked if he thought that he could be saved if he evaded. He's very sorry, but the guy was wrong. Bim realized that these fighters were well prepared. He can't get rid of them so easily. He needs to get out of here first. After which he tried to get to his feet, thinking about the best way to escape. The guy finally decided to escape by any means. He realized that from the very beginning the division was putting a spoke in his wheels. And I was very upset why he didn't think of this right away. But the warriors exclaimed that he realized it too late. One of them had already prepared his weapon, turning his gaze towards the fleeing Bim. The guy thought that so many people were chasing him alone, and he asked how the Night Division could consider themselves good people after this. After all, he is one, and there are so many of them. Then he heard someone's voice not far from him. He said that he could handle it completely alone. Bim did not expect the boy to be so unexpectedly next to him. He was too nimble and dexterous. The main character, being near a tree not far from the guy, warned him that he would not escape. He will catch him no matter what. His speed and desire will allow him to do this, even if there is no doubt. He took out his sword, which glowed with a yellow flame of fire, and he told Bim that his journey would end here. He was confident in his abilities, but the guy was not going to give up, taking a fighting stance. He exclaimed what a high opinion of himself the boy had. He called him just a dog of the Night Division. He prepared for the attack and exclaimed in a menacing voice that whoever dared to stand in his way would certainly die. He gripped his sword as tightly as possible, and he began to use his abilities. There were a lot of swords, and they all flew up. And under his feet, everything glowed with a bright blue light. The main character, looking at what was happening, said that this sword is really powerful, and the guy has already taken a step towards Noah. He decided to attack as soon as possible, and so, using the dark ball technique, the 8 cardinal directions, he rushed to attack the boy. He was accompanied by many swords that flew towards the main character. Then Noah put a fiery sword in front of him and said that he shouldn't have done this. Tongues of yellow bright fire burned around him. Meanwhile, the two brothers watched what was happening, very worried about the boy. Everyone was thinking about something different, but then a powerful explosion was heard in front of them. A powerful stream of fiery red-yellow rays pushed them aside with its force. After this, from a strong explosion and bright fire, clouds of smoke and dust swirled around. The main character stood with his eyes closed as if meditating. He put his sword back into its sheath after such a strong, powerful blow. The brothers, looking at what was happening, were very surprised at what happened. They were completely wet with sweat, as they were very worried about the main character. Bim was crippled after being hit by the boy. He was left without an arm and half his body. It was just a continuous bloody wound, and a very creepy picture. The guy clenched his teeth and exclaimed that it was simply impossible what happened to his body. He was simply shocked and very scared. The main character asked him to rest in peace. He hopes that there will be men in hell that he likes. Bim's face had already begun to change, but he exclaimed that even if he died, he would drag him down with him. The guy didn't let up, after which a fountain of some terrible scarlet blood began to shoot out of his mouth. Even in this state, already being half dead, he still did not give up. He vomited a whole pool of blood right on the ground in front of him, after which he laughed terribly. He looked like a demon. This blood turned dark cherry red. He said that he exchanged this bloody baby with the shaman for life, and today is a good day to sacrifice yourself. He added that they will burn in hell along with the main character. Then Noah decided to use the demonic hand of a dead man. In a situation with monsters, this always works, leaving no chance for anyone. At the same moment, in place of his left hand, a terrible monster's hand grew, glowing with a bright green flame. He stood in front of a bloody, creepy monster that had grown several rows of gnarled, sharp fangs. The pot-bellied, bloody monster was disgusting and disgusting. He seemed to be reborn out of nowhere, resembling a living bloody clot. Growing up in front of the boy, he began to growl with a terrible demonic roar. The main character began to attack this terrible monster with one movement of his demonic hand. He smashed it with one blow. If Bim thought that this creature was stronger than his monster hand, then he was very mistaken. So streams of blood splashed around, after which the main character scratched his ear, noticing that the red fat guy was too noisy. After all, he almost deafened him with his scream. My ears are already blocked. After he threw this monster to the ground, Bim immediately fell exhausted onto the red grass, which until recently had been green. Already lying on the ground, looking at the main character, he thought about what a strong man he was. And I realized that he fell in love with him. Even the dead boy never stopped thinking about love. After which they came as close as possible to this dying guy. They decided to make sure whether the guy was alive or had finally died. Eric's servants ran up to the body and exclaimed that this bastard was finally dead. These guys were very happy and even hugged, saying that heaven had heard their prayers. Tears flowed down their cheeks. Jerry asked brother Noah why the two boys were crying, to which the main character replied that they are all people here with special life experience. He did not explain everything to the boy in detail. Eric approached the main character and said a big thank you to all the brothers from the Night Division for their help. Noah answered the man that the fight against evil is the main task of the Night Division. The man said that one way or another, he is now in debt to the Night Division. If so, what can he help them with? He asked them not to be shy under any circumstances, but to contact him directly. Noah decided to act immediately, and he said that the Night Division really had a case in which he could help them. Eric, knitting his eyebrows, very seriously asked them to speak directly and not be shy. After all, he is now their debtor. The main character explained that they wanted him to help them find a magician, a certain Lewis, which is very important to them. And here we have a beautiful, neat room again, on which hung a sign of the Night Division. For some reason, Jerry was very angry and offended. He was completely burning with rage, and folding his arms over his chest, he lowered his eyes. Noah, sitting at the table drinking tea, asked the boy to calm down, explaining that whoever should come will always come. And then, before they had time to finish this phrase, they heard someone's steps. Someone came into their room. It was one of the Newt brothers. He exclaimed that there was news from Eric. He said the man had finally shown up. Jerry immediately changed his face, finally opened his eyes and exclaimed joyfully, asking where he was. Is there really any news about him? Newt explained to everyone that unexpectedly for them, this young man hid in a brothel. The main character exclaimed that this was very good, and he said that it was necessary to immediately gather people from the Night Division to capture this magician Louis. Mr. Samuel turned to Noah and said that he would also go with them. The boy told Mr. Samuel that he was wounded, to which the man explained that this was not a problem. He received a serious wound, but the magician Louis suffered even more. Newt said that Mr. Eric learned several clues from foreign priests. Other rebels were also looking for this magician Louis. Newt, with a slight change in his face, asked whether these people would create problems for them in the future. Samuel exclaimed that if they come, they will definitely catch them, which, of course, will save them from a whole series of different troubles. Meanwhile, we are transported to the brothel. A girl was sitting at a table with a cup of tea. A guy was sitting on the sofa, meditating with his eyes closed. A bright violet light came from the guy. He was very thoughtful and beads of sweat were running down his face. Then suddenly, he opened his eyes, and he exclaimed that the beginning of all beginnings, the earth is clean. He asked her to bless his body. Pure Land is the heavenly realm or the pure abode of Buddha or Bodhisattva in Mahayana Buddhism. The term Pure Land refers to East Asian Buddhism. The guy started coughing up blood, after which I thought how terrible it is. He, Louis, broke away from the pursuit with great difficulty, but the Night Division is still hunting for him. He needs to heal his wound before they arrive, but for now he will hide here. The girl clung to the man and told the gentleman that he had spent all his savings. Why doesn't he want to move in with her? She said that if everything continued in the same spirit, she simply could not stand it. After which the woman pressed herself as close to him as possible and promised to show him a lot of tricks that he would surely like. Louis, opening his eyes wide, looked sternly at this woman and exclaimed in a rude tone that she should get out of here. The girl jumped up and ran to the exit. She repeated his words, which he said rudely, and she exclaimed that she was not his mother, caring for him with such wounds. After which the guy sat in the lotus position and again began to meditate with his eyes closed. The girl who left him slammed the door as hard as she could, so that everything around her began to shake. Walking out the door, she folded her arms across her chest and said that she was a person of this specialty. How could she face such a monstrous human? Then suddenly her eyes began to widen wider and wider. Someone's hand fell on her mouth, closing it, after which someone dragged this girl out the door. She could only hum since her mouth was closed. She could not utter a single word. This girl was dragged away from the spacious corridor by a boy named Jerry. This was the main character's friend. She immediately looked at this guy strangely. Nearby was the main character with two brothers and all the other warriors. Noah put his finger to his mouth and looked at the girl and asked her to be quiet. The girls did not let go of their mouths so that she would not scream. But she could only moo in this situation, making muffled sounds. In front of us are large spacious doors to a double luxurious room. On the sides of the door there were large beautiful vases with bright snow-white flowers. It was in this very room that a boy named Louis sat. He continued to meditate, but then suddenly hearing some strange sound, he opened his eyes. At this time, the main character, Newt, and the rest of their people stood outside the door on both sides. They crept up unnoticed, waiting for the moment, after which the main character, together with Newt, pushed the door to this room with all their might. There was a loud crash. They opened it wide, after which Noah exclaimed to the magician Louis. He asked him not to try to escape again, as they would catch him anyway. The men began to enter the room as quickly as possible to grab the guy. The main character glanced in his direction. The guy was already getting ready to wash. He asked if the main character was going to catch him, and he exclaimed that he was in no way capable of this. After which, the magician opened the window and immediately jumped out of it, jumping to the ground. Flying through the remaining floors, he very deftly and skillfully landed on one knee, resting his hands on the ground. He was about to rise to his feet, but saw in front of him a cold weapon in the form of magical power shimmering with a bright blue light. This icy, glowing spear flew straight at him, but the guy immediately grabbed her with his hand, trying to stop her. Louis raised his head after stopping the weapon and saw Samuel in front of him. Having recognized this guy, he asked what he was doing here again. Was he really looking for death again? Samuel, looking at him with menacing, stern eyes, knitted his eyebrows. The man asked him to prepare for death. Then the magician looked back at him, and he asked why he was so slow. If he is going to kill him, then let him do it, and not just flutter his tongue. Samuel tightly grabbed his sharp, shiny sword, which glowed with a bright blue haze, and he rushed at the guy. He flew up to him without letting go of his weapon. The magician closed his eyes, as if meditating. He calmly awaited the approaching blow. The man was already close to him and lowered his sharp sword directly onto his hand. But Louis immediately parried the blow with his hand without even getting hurt. The blade of the sword stuck to the skin of his hand without causing any injury to him. Newt's face immediately changed. His eyebrows knitted together, and he looked at his hand, not understanding what had happened. His gaze was slightly frightened. He looked at the sword that was on the guy's hand as if on some kind of piece of iron. A bright blue smoke also emanated from him, but the enemy's hand remained intact. Then the main character and Jerry ran up to them from around the corner. They exclaimed to Mr. Samuel that they would certainly help him. Louis immediately glanced at the guys approaching him and asked if they thought they would take him out of numbers. After which, closing his eyes again, the magician began to meditate. There was a lot of energy coming from him. It glowed with a bright yellow light. Bright rays of a light glow glowed from it. The rays of yellow light seemed to throw Samuel away from them as if by the wind. He was thrown far back, after which the guy landed on his 2 feet and coughed a little. The main character was very surprised when he saw this. Beads of sweat ran down his cheeks. This was the first time the boy had encountered such force. Louis said, "The beginning of all beginnings, the world of illusions." He held his fingers twisted in strange patterns. A golden haze of some inexplicable energy continued to emanate from him. He asked the world of illusions to come down from heaven. It was as if some kind of golden god appeared above him, folding his hands in front of him. He was sitting in the lotus position. Newt thought about the beginning of everything. The spirit of Xiangganqi is hidden in it. Can he really control the beginning of all beginnings? They were all seriously surprised. This bright yellow light reached them. The main character and Jerry immediately grabbed their chests with their hands. This color had a deadly effect on them. Newt asked everyone to be careful. After all, this is a world of illusions. The boy asked his friends not to succumb to his techniques. After the yellow haze of light hit Jerry, his face changed, exclaiming, "What bliss!" The main character immediately looked at him with a strange look. He thought that it felt like the essence of a deity had taken over his body. Was he really the vessel for the beginning of all beginnings? It's power. They can't resist it. If this traitor Lewis is not injured, only a few of them will be able to resist him. The magician continued to stand with his eyes closed, pouring streams of bright yellow light. Newt's second brother extended his hand forward and began to use his strength and magic. He decided to use Dead Man's Bones, a secret technique. A light purple smoke emanated from his hand. Lewis turned his head in his direction, trying to feel what the guy was going to do. 10,000 bone bells. A huge bone bell appeared above Louis's head from which blue transparent light flowed. Louis immediately screamed with a terrible cry, after which the force of the bell pushed him far back. A powerful explosion occurred at the place where the bell fell. Newt's brother asked his friends to attack him quickly. He grabbed his hand from which came a light purple smoke, and he exclaimed that he could not hold it back for long. Then Jerry pulled out some kind of talisman in the form of paper covered in blood. The paper began to burn. It glowed with a yellow glow, and he rushed using his power, a fiery talisman in the form of a fanged bright dragon. He decided to use Taoist magic, Dragon Flame. The huge fire dragon had already approached the enemy and wrapped him around his body. His muzzle was getting closer and closer to the boy. The main character and Jerry were already running up to the enemy. They put their hands forward, also using their strength. Noah took out his sharp shining sword using the power of the sword of scorching fire. The boy glowed with a bright red glow, which was already approaching the enemy's chest. His bladed weapon glowed with a bright fiery flame, turning it into a hot fire. And then the tip touched the magician's chest. Louis continued to stand with everything calm. He didn't even move. The sword didn't even leave a scratch on his chest. He asked if this was all they were capable of, after which the main character flew away from the guy far into the air, hiding behind his hands. In his other hand he held a sword, which left no mark on Louis's chest. But suddenly, the enemy began to spew out splashes of scarlet, mixed with black blood from his mouth. His eyes glowed with yellow fire. Samuel exclaimed that he was possessed by the spirit of Xianganqi. Therefore, there is no way they can defeat him alone. The guy advised us to rush at him all together and attack as quickly as possible. The beginning of all beginnings, hope, absolutely empty. The magician asked the ancestors to quickly hear his pleading call. Then Jerry glanced to the side and exclaimed that Louis's assistants were already here. Some noise was heard behind them. Turning around, they saw many people who were armed. Above them hung in the air a huge golden lotus, like a golden one, from which a bright yellow light emanated. At the head of these guys was an old man. He laughed and exclaimed that they had come. The man promised to beat the crap out of them. The main character, looking at his hand, realized something. She glowed with a red haze. The guy said that this golden lotus sucks all the strength out of them. Samuel, realizing this, said that they want both sides to suffer. They want to benefit from this conflict themselves. Louis crossed his arms across his chest and laughed. He exclaimed that so many people wanted to take his life. After which, spreading his arms to the sides, he said that since they were all so eager for his death, then he was going to fight them not for life, but for death. Concentrating and gathering all his strength, Louis decided to use his secret technique. With this secret technique, he will reach the peak of his power. The magician again spread his arms as wide as possible to the sides, and closing his eyes, smiled slightly. He was enveloped in bright rays of yellow transparent light. Louis, narrowing his eyes, exclaimed that he wanted to see their pathetic attempts to resist him. It was as if he was filled with some new incredible power. He was glowing with power. Samuel, looking at what was happening, told everyone to quickly retreat. He explained that they simply could not defeat him, even all together. The magician spun his hand as if drawing a small ball of fire around her. His magic was somehow mesmerizing. Suddenly, unexpectedly, the people who came to help Louis began to writhe, squirming. Veins appeared on the guy's face and sweat flowed. The man began to scream and squirm. It was a very creepy sight. His face twisted in different directions and his fingers curled. He looked like a zombie or a monster.
The old man who was in charge closed his eyes and, with a grimace, exclaimed that this was the highest form of magic.
The man, who was crooked, barely said that he should be spared. His eyes began to pop out of their sockets and his face stretched out, as if pushing these eyes out. Louis clenched his fist again and raised his hand up. He never opened his eyes, but continued to meditate, releasing his power in bright red tones. That guy was lifted up straight into the air above their heads, after which he stopped twisting. His head simply burst into bright red threads. Louis put his hand forward and opened his eyes, which were simply empty. He asked everyone to beg for mercy, because it was already too late, after which the man, whose head was torn into pieces, simply collapsed to the ground. It was a disgusting sight. Everyone was simply shocked to see this. The old man who was in charge immediately exclaimed that they should not engage in a fight with him, but rush into the scattering as soon as possible. After which, the old man took some kind of magical weapon in the form of a round ball in his hand, and decided to try to do at least something against this monster. The old man immediately, despite the fact that Louis's force was pushing him back, still threw this magic ball forward. There was a small explosion and a dark, thick cloud rose. This cloud blocked visibility. The main character thought and asked questions. They decided to take advantage of this moment. While clouds of black smoke enveloped everything around them and tried to break away, Jerry told the main character that things were bad. This traitor magician Louis, for no apparent reason, just up and disappeared. Where did he go? Noah immediately thought about it. He was very serious, apparently putting his thoughts together in a puzzle. Samuel also stood nearby, deep in thought. Noah said that they fell into his trap. Louis's strength was exhausted. He just wanted to delay them and hide. Samuel said, turning to the main character, that it is through force that he restores his great magic. Therefore his strength is already running out. Then Samuel gave the order. He ordered half of the people to pursue Louis's people, and let the rest pursue this traitor, the magician Louis himself. Then the main character heard something again. He thought very hard and glanced to the side. He thought there was something left of Louis. Some plan was ripening in his head, and now he was already holding a blue transparent ball in his hands, summoning his little demon. He asked the little animal to help find that person. Immediately, through the blue haze of the portal in the main character's hand, a demon appeared. He flew out of the portal laughing. The boy gave him the command to quickly look for the magician. Then the little animal jumped to the ground and began to sniff the spilled puddle of blood. He pressed his paw to his chin and began to think very intently. He turned his head from side to side, trying to understand and concentrate. Without thinking twice, the little animal immediately perked up and began making some sounds, pointing the main character in a certain direction. He stretched his paw there, trying to explain something. The boy realized that he had disappeared in the direction where his little demon was pointing. He immediately glanced at me, remembering where to go. Meanwhile, weakened and exhausted, Louis began to make his way through the thicket of the forest, holding his hands on tree trunks. Leaning his hand on the trunk of a tall tree, he realized that his wound had opened again. He needed to quickly find shelter. But then suddenly he heard a noise. Some kind of weapon in the form of a whip flew towards him. It was a hard whip that turned into a deadly weapon. It was directed towards the guy, and passed casually, hitting him on the arm. Immediately blood gushed from his wounded hand. It flowed over him like a stream. The guy didn't expect that someone would already be waiting for him here. The blood from his hand splashed directly onto his face, running down his cheek. The man with the beard wanted to catch him. He laughed and pulled out his long, blue, glowing whip. She was very dangerous. The man grabbed the handle as tightly as possible, preparing to go on the offensive. This whip saved him more than once, and killed his opponents. He told the gentleman that he had finally caught him. His plan had reached a key stage. He would not be able to escape in this state. The man asked if he was worthy of owning his power, to which Louis asked in response what kind of master he was. The guy explained that he was just a puppet, a vessel for a dead man. The man replied that he was wrong. Even the saint was ready to take risks. Why be so afraid for your life? In addition, he stole all the secret knowledge of the one he killed. Isn't he afraid of not getting to the promised land after death? There are so many false things that are accepted as truth. Louis said that if he leaves now, he will not kill him. But if he continues to interfere with him, he will disdain to kill one of the people of the guy he already killed. The mustachioed man laughed. I asked the young master if he still wants to kill him. Since he is so greedy, he can take his head to the head to receive a reward. The magician exclaimed that he did not expect that he would have to deal with such garbage, and that he would have to use his magical powers towards him. After which the boy clenched his hands. A bone dragon appeared behind him. He told the mustachioed man that he was lucky. The man was very surprised when he saw a bone dragon behind him. He wondered if this was the monster of the man he killed. Louis said that he was very sorry that he was too seriously injured. Only his magical power will open his eyes. After which he called the man a rat. This monster was crawling down his hand. The The boy exclaimed that he had the honor of falling from the clutches of the monster of the guy he killed, whose name was Ricci. The man immediately got scared. He cowered, sweat running down his face. He asked the young master why he brought this monster here. Meanwhile, the boy had already closed his eyes and clenched his fists. The fanged muzzle of his monster hung on his left hand. In addition, this monster had 2 eyes on each side that glowed red. He was already heading towards the man, and the mustachioed man took to his heels, quickly running away from the terrible monster who was looking at him with empty red eyes. The boy pointed his hand at him. The monster opened its vile mouth. Many rows of teeth, sharp as stakes, looked at him, after which a bright yellow-red ray of scorching light began to emerge from the mouth of this monster. The mustachioed man tried to escape as quickly as possible, but he didn't have time. This beam hit him, tearing half of his body into pieces. The man only managed to scream, not understanding what happened to him, being shocked. Removing his hand with his monster, the magician grinned and said that such an inglorious death was just right for him. But then the guy's eyes changed their calm expression. Someone stuck a sword into his chest from behind, which went right through. He pierced him mercilessly and mercilessly. The boy could not understand what had happened. Blood was flowing down his body. The main character approached him from behind, explaining that in a conflict between 2 sides, the benefit goes to the third. Louis froze, looking at the tip of the sword, along which his blood flowed. Opening his lifeless eyes wide, he whispered how this could be. The sword went deeper and deeper into his chest. The blood flowed around in huge scarlet splashes, after which it began to flow down the cold, shiny metal. After that, the guy fell face down on the ground, pushing out with his body the cold metal stained with his own blood. Meanwhile, the main character looked at the creepy hand in the form of a monster on the body of Louis, who had fallen to the ground. He began to look at her, thinking about something. He thought that he did not expect that this rebel Ricci had such a weapon. If not for this old man, he would probably already be dead. Approaching the dead guy, Noah, looking at the monster on his hand, thought that there was definitely evil energy in this thing. After all, she is just like a living creature. The main character, without fear, grabbed this bone monster with his hand and began to tear it away from the hand of dead Louis. This monster dug right into his hand so that he could barely tear it off. Then the boy's gaze fell on something that was under the chest of the dead magician. He noticed it among the pool of blood and reached out with his hand, wondering what it could be. It was some kind of map. He took it in his hands and unfolded the papyrus. The boy wanted to know what was written there. Having opened the bloody paper, he fixed his gaze carefully examining the contents of the text. What could all this mean? Everything was written there about the demon that was on his hand. Use blood to create a bow, a demon to create arrows. And yet, how to use this demon for your own purposes. It's not like light magic, it's more like a dark art. One of 72 magical creatures. This means there are even stronger 71. The main character looked at the monster again and decided that since he saw this priceless creature, the boy paused and thought. After standing for a while, he was still sure that he would take it. And he began to pull in the monsters with his bright blue portal. Perhaps he will need it someday. He will definitely find an approach and application for it. Here the boy became a little wary. He heard whose conversation it was. Someone said that he seemed to have heard something and asked to quickly follow him. Noah decided that the people of the Night Division were here. Although they know nothing about the demon Ricci, they still need to be very careful so that they do not suspect anything. 2 men were already approaching the main character. It was Mr. Samuel and Jerry. Mr. Samuel called the guy to see what was ahead of them. Then the comrades came closer to the bushes and Jerry looked through them. It was necessary to reconnoiter the situation. Looking carefully ahead, his eyes began to widen. Sweat was running down his face in streams. He wondered, after which he immediately jumped out from behind the bushes. Jerry asked everyone to run here quickly. Brother Noah and that rebel Louis are here. He was very worried as he ran up to his friend. The main character, in turn, lay on the ground next to the dead body of the rebel. Apparently, this was his plan. In order for no one to suspect him, the boy pretended that he was lying unconscious. Jerry asked Brother Louis to wake up quickly. After which, Noah immediately opened his eyes and saw Jerry, and asked what was wrong with the rebel. He held his head with his hand, pretending that he had a really bad headache. Jerry asked Brother Noah not to worry because the rebel was already dead. Then Mr. Samuel turned to the main character. He asked the boy how he managed to finish off this incredibly powerful magician. Noah answered the master that, to be honest, when he arrived here, the rebel was already fighting with one of Ricci's followers. He didn't want to give himself up or appear suspicious in any way. He explained that he attacked him when he was fighting with that old man. He also got hit very hard and then passed out. Jerry immediately clenched his fists with joy and exclaimed that Brother Noah was really cool. Once I was able to finish off this bastard. Newt's brother was also next to the others, and laughed and exclaimed that the reward for his head was now in their hands. He stood in front of the main character, smiling contentedly, and the boy listened to him with his eyes closed. He still pretended to be a weakened man. Noah asked Mr. Samuel what they should do next. The man replied that he needed to send the corpse of this traitor Louis to the Haeyang mansion. He was afraid that the path would be close to me. In addition, the Night Division cannot take full responsibility for what happened. Samuel touched the main character on the shoulder and asked during his absence whether he would take on the duties of head of the Night Division. The boy replied that he was here for the first time and was afraid that it would be difficult for him to take on such a burden. Samuel answered him by objecting that during these days he had seen what he was capable of. He is more suitable for this role than anyone else. One of the brothers, Newt, raising his hand up, told Brother Noah not to refuse. They, in turn, will happily follow him. Then the main character bowed to them. He exclaimed that in this case, obedience is better than politeness. He was thinking that he had been too pushy lately. He should have been more careful, but he didn't seem to succeed. It was necessary to be less ambitious, since it was dangerous for himself. Samuel looked very carefully at the main character and thought with hope that nothing would happen during his absence. A bright, crooked moon shone in the sky. The stars sparkled around, illuminating the dense, huge forest. But the light of the twinkling stars did not fall into the depths of the forest, since the crowns of the trees were too thick and huge. The trees rustled with their fluffy green crowns. Someone's hand in the darkness of the forest carried a large torch glowing with fire, illuminating its path. If you take a closer look, it was some kind of man. Many arrows were tied behind his back, which indicated that he was armed. The man looked very tired. He said that lately there has been less and less game in the mountains. If this continues, he will not be able to save money for a dowry. The man walked forward thinking about this, but then his thoughts were interrupted by some sounds. He immediately stopped, alert. The man heard some music, and I wondered who was celebrating the wedding in the middle of the night. What could this be? Where does this melody come from? He felt someone appear behind him. Some silhouette was definitely behind him. He felt it with all his gut. A tent suddenly appeared ahead, with some guys standing on both sides. The tent was red, and they were dressed in long red dresses with red caps on their heads. The man saw this ahead, and exclaimed that these were ghosts. His eyes became twice as big, and streams of sweat ran down his face. The man was seriously scared. He couldn't understand where they came from on his way in the first place. He was shocked. And then the next day came. Events take place in the Night Division training camp. The main character stood in the middle of the training ground holding his sharp sword tightly. The boy said to himself, "A sword of scorching fire," after which he stood for a short time with his eyes closed, intently concentrating. He concentrated his energy before striking, and swinging his sword, he hit the concrete training post. He knocked him to the ground with one powerful blow. The boy thought that after the battle, his strength had reached the average level of rank 8, and his improvement speed was already quite high. Then Jerry's voice came from behind him. He told Brother Noah that he had received news from Haeyang. The main character immediately became wary and asked what the news was, after which the boy unfolded the papyrus, on which something was written. Jerry asked Brother Noah what it was. The boy began to read what it says here. In the last few days, the sounds of either funeral or wedding music have been heard from the General's Mountain in Donglin County. After this began to happen, several hunters who went into the forest after dark disappeared. But who mourns relatives and arranges weddings at night? Could this really be the work of demons? Now this is unknown to them. That's why Haeyang sent them this letter so that they could figure it out. Noah said that he did not expect that as soon as Mr. Samuel left, some kind of trouble would immediately happen to them. The boy said that this time there is a high probability of meeting a ghost in the mountains, and he asked Jerry to call Newt and his brother so that they could perform as soon as possible. And here in front of us are the large iron gates of the Donglin County government. The main character, looking forward, asked if the Donglin County government had really become so dilapidated. Jerry replied that Donglin is a small county. They don't even have their own night division, so if something happens, they look to them for help. Then a man with a beard opened the large iron gate. Seeing the main character, he said that he was finally here. The man was very happy to meet them. They were met by the ruler of Donglin County, Mason. Bowing before them, he said that if they had not come, they would have lost all hope. After all, everything is very bad. They no longer know what to do. The main character asked Mr. Mason not to worry, and I asked him to tell me in more detail what was happening in the district now. The man began to say that it started a few days ago. The sounds of music began to be heard from the General's Mountain, sometimes similar to funeral music, and sometimes to wedding music. This music seems to be playing in your head, so there is no use covering your ears. People are terribly scared. They all want to leave these places with their families. A grandfather with a gray beard, looking at Noah, begged for help. The boy told Mr. Mason not to worry. Since they are here, they will certainly sort everything out. Noah turned to Jerry and asked him to use the power of the Jade Dragon and check if there were any traces of negative energy left here. Jerry immediately obeyed and took out some piece of paper covered in blood. It was a talisman from which a yellow glowing dragon appeared. He immediately flew over their heads into the sky, waving his golden tail. The head of the district, seeing this, was already frightened and pulled back a little. They all watched the flying dragon. Jerry looked at him very carefully. His eyes became twice as big. It was as if something was happening to this dragon. It turned from yellow to fiery red, with dark, almost black smoke. Jerry said that the evil energy from this mountain is so powerful that even at such a distance it poisoned his jade dragon. Then the main character turned to the manager, Mr. Mason, and pointed towards the mountain and asked if this was the General's Mountain that he was talking about. The man replied that yes, that's how it is. And he began to tell me that during the previous dynasty, the commander-in-chief Li Zhugong lived in Donglin County. The general took part in many battles and achieved great success on the battlefield. In honor of him, the mountain is called Generals. The man took out a book and said that this is the history of Donglin County. From this book he will be able to learn about the life of General Li Zhugong in as much detail as possible. Then the main character took the book with the story and opened it and began to read it. He grinned a little, and handing the book back to the manager, he said that this book tells in great detail about the life of General Li Zhugong. Even his relationships during his lifetime are described. Newt said that the previous dynasty ruled more than 500 years ago. And in those days, chaos reigned in the world. Various types of magic appeared one after another. Many people have tried to achieve immortality. His brother asked if the general had buried himself alive on this mountain, and now he had risen from the dead. The main character listened carefully to what the brothers were talking about. After a short pause, he began to speak thoughtfully. The boy said that he is not sure yet. Tonight they will investigate the music on General's Mountain and will notify people immediately if they find anything strange. He asks them to be on their guard, not to engage in battle, and to focus on obtaining information. The guys with him immediately obeyed his instructions. Since in this expedition and such an important matter, he was the main one among them. The main character climbed onto the high roof of one of the houses and looked forward with a serious, businesslike look, holding onto his sharp-edged weapon. Then he seemed to hear something. The boy began to listen as carefully as possible. He thought about what was really strange about this music. And here we hear nothing. There are no clues. It looks like he should go in search of information to the General's Mountain. The boy stood lost in thought, figuring out where he heard the sounds from. He felt the presence of some stranger. After which he turned sharply toward the house, behind which there was a man in a hat. Noah asked him to show up immediately. The main character walked forward along the roof and noticed how this man flashed past him near the house opposite. He fixed his gaze on this man in a long suit and realized that he wanted to escape. A man in a headdress and a long cloak rose into the air and began to fly away like lightning. The boy asked him to stop. The main character immediately jumped off the roof, leaning on one knee. The ninja jumped in flight further and further from him. Noah, looking at him more closely, noticed that his running technique looked somehow very strange. His speed was very fast. It resembled a stream of sharp, strong wind. The man flew to one wall and immediately stopped when he reached a high stone fence. His eyes glowed somehow strangely. The man stopped near the wall as if thinking. He also heard some noise behind him. It was the main character. He was already standing behind him, addressing him. The boy asked why he stopped and did not continue to run away. Then the man, without thinking twice, took out two very sharp, shiny sickles. They glowed against the background of the moon, signaling danger. He never raised his face. Noah immediately took out his long, glowing sword. He said that the similar man did not want to be captured, so he asked not to blame him for his recklessness. After which the boy, jumping in the air, sharply waved his glowing sword and told the man to perish from his sword. As the sword approached and the cold steel hit the sharp curved sickles of the enemy, a bright red-yellow light blazed. The man let out some kind of terrible scream. Everything around was glowing with bright red fire. There was a yellow light glow around the main character's sword. But after his cry, the man's sickles began to shine with some kind of purple bright rays, pushing the main character back. They were very strong, emitting powerful energy. The boy landed on one knee and held onto his sword. He thought that the man was strong enough, but his movements are not human-like. The main character immediately began to think who this person could be, who most likely is not even a person. Meanwhile, the enemy's mighty sharp sickle was already flying towards him, sparkling with a violet bright light. He left a whole trench behind him, which struck the earth with its incredible power. The tip of the sickle hit the main character. He hit the wall, which shattered into pieces. There was a lot of gray smoke and gloomy dust around. The main character gave him a contemptuous, evil look. He began to think who it could be. The man, without thinking twice, began to attack him, approaching him using a second sickle. The blade flashed right next to the main character's head. The boy immediately grabbed the hilt of his sharp, fiery sword, and he began to use the power of the flaming sword of the same name. The boy began to swing his sword but immediately fell to one knee. His opponent was already nearby. The enemy was too strong and unbending. Since the enemy's force threw him aside, he raised his gaze trying to see. Who is in front of him? Where does he get so much power and energy from? Then he saw in front of him not a man, but some kind of monster. He was already holding two sharp sickles that glowed with purple light. The boy realized that this was definitely a zombie. He is still evolving into a black zombie. His body is as if made of stone and steel, and his strength is equal to 8 royal warriors. But at the end of the day, it's still a zombie, not a human. And zombies, as he already knows, have too many weaknesses. Now at least something is clear. Having seen his weaknesses, the boy will understand how to defeat the enemy. Then the monster began to accelerate, thrusting its weapon forward. He contorted his creepy face and began to approach the boy. The main character looked at him as he made his movements and immediately identified his first weakness. The main trump card was already in his hands. All that remains is to find some other weakness and his victory. The boy noticed that the zombie was moving too clumsily, too slowly. He tried to strike, but hit the sickle directly on a huge, powerful stone. Noah, of course, managed to skillfully dodge, since his opponent was too slow. Immediately, he managed to discern a second weakness. Holding some magical bright yellow symbol in his hand, the boy realized that they could not resist under the pressure of magic. Then the main character began to use a golden seal, which glowed bright yellow and scorching for the zombies. There was a yellow halo around the seal, illuminating everything around. A powerful explosion occurred right in the place where the evil monster stood. Everything around lit up with yellow fire, throwing bright flashes. Looking at the clouds of smoke left after the flame, Noah thought that zombies do not walk alone. Somewhere nearby there must be someone who controls them. Watching the clouds of smoke and thinking about it, the boy heard something not far from him. Listening more carefully, he felt with all his gut that he had found the one who was watching him. The boy tried not to give himself away and acted very carefully. He was behind the wall of the house that was next to him. Some man who looked like a child was standing around the corner in a headdress. The main character immediately chased towards the one who was following him. He rushed after him like lightning. There was no way he could miss who he was looking for. Noah ran along the roof, and the boy along the road. He looked in which direction this man would move. He calculated his every step, his every movement. After which, he accelerated and jumped from the roof, landing right next to him. He did it very deftly and skillfully like a ninja. He wanted to use force, and closed his eyes. Having almost caught up with the fleeing man, he turned out to be more dexterous than his opponent, who was watching him. The headdress flew off the one he had already caught up with. The hat flew somewhere to the side, cutting through the air. The main character looked in surprise at the one he caught, and he asked if it was her. A girl stood in front of him. She said that he hit her, and she said that he was an adult. Isn't it a shame for him to offend a little girl? The girl held her other hand with one hand, and the main character immediately began to ask her without any booze. She contorted her face, tears welling up in her eyes. Then the girl began to cry tearfully and say that he was a man. How can he even beat girls? The boy thought about the fact that she called him not a man. He contorted his face, after which the main character changed his face. His eyes glowed with a red fiery light. He said that he would soon show her whether he was a man or not. The girl was seriously scared. She stopped crying and exclaimed what he was going to do. Something incomprehensible happened here. There was just some noise, and the street was still quiet at night. The girl immediately fell to her knees and began to apologize to the boy. She explained that she had made a mistake and would not dare make it again. Then the boy looked down at the girl and replied that he should have done this earlier. The girl, in turn, folded her hands on her chest and lowered her head down. She thought that if her zombie hadn't been injured, she wouldn't have screwed up like that. The main character asked the girl what her name was. She admitted that her name was Lucy. Noah said that her family. He can talk about him even without her words. This is a religious, wretched, evil society dedicated to improving zombies. Then the girl, clenching her fist, screamed that he himself was wretched, and his whole family was wretched. How dare he offend her and say such things? Then the boy swung his hand and hit the girl again. He exclaimed how dare she even dare him. The girl immediately began to cry and asked for his forgiveness. She rubbed her small head with her hand. The girl began to explain that she came from an ordinary clan of Hunan corpse hunters, a follower of the Liu family, the Three Righteous Peaks in Huxi, associated with the branch of Hunters of the Dead. These wretched, unusual, evil cultivators have a different origin. Despite this, zombie cultivation is a unique secret art that the Hunan clan has carefully preserved. They introduced and classified a number of secret arts, combining martial arts and qi cultivation. Generally speaking, his strong black hand is obtained by combining martial arts and the Wu family's ghost-cutting technique of the Hunan clan. Noah said that the Husi Liu family has created a regular method of cultivating and raising zombies, perfecting the cultivation method. It is definitely not an inferior class. The girl laughed and replied that at least he had a little common sense. Then the main character grabbed her hand and asked her to stop bowing. He asked the girl to get up from her knees. Then she stood up and, folding her hands in front of her, thanked His Highness. Noah asked what a direct descendant of the Hunan clan was doing so far from his place. He asked why she was watching him. The girl replied that his face did not meet her standards. Why should she pay attention to him? Let her not deceive herself. She probes Jiang Mountain. And not only her, there are also several other cultivators here in the Donlin region. The main character asked what she was talking about. Is she also exploring the ghostly melody heard every night from Mount Jigan? The girl began to explain to him that she was not interested in the ghostly melody. She was here for the treasures hidden there. The main character was very surprised what the hidden treasures were, and he asked who told the girl that there were some treasures here. Then the girl opened her big eyes, which became twice as big, and began to explain thoughtfully. The whole story started last week. The girl began to tell what happened a couple of days ago. The events took place in a tavern. A man was getting drunk while sitting in a tavern. It was an astrologer from Yangbei. While he was drunk, he accidentally revealed information about the hidden treasure. He began to say that that night he watched the sky and there he saw a violet aura emanating from Zhong Mountain in the Donglin region. There must be treasures hidden there. Including her, there were other 5 cultivators who heard what he was saying. The girl sat at the next table, listening carefully to everything. The girl said that several of them decided to join forces to find the treasure. After the agreement, they arrived in Donlin County. But she didn't expect that people from the Night Watch would also be here and thought what kind of bad luck. The main character put his hand on his chin and thought whether recent events could be connected with the treasure she was talking about. Things get really confusing. The boy continued to think. And the girl, sitting, glanced at him. She coughed a little, and Noah suggested something. The girl exclaimed, how about their Night Division teaming up with her in finding the treasure? She would tell them about these cultivators, and they could also keep the treasure for themselves. The boy thought about it and asked if this wouldn't mean that she had come all this way in vain. By sharing these treasures. The girl replied that too many people were aiming for the treasure. Her chances of getting it were negligible. In truth, she didn't come here to get the treasure, to collect corpses. These cultivators are quite strong. If someone accidentally kills them, their corpses will not just disappear. Using her family's skills, she will take it upon herself to turn them into zombies. The main character thought that she was so polite, and now she doesn't stop talking about corpses. If he dies, she will definitely turn him into a zombie as well. Noah, approaching the girl, said that she had already lost to him, and asked what she had, what could be offered to make a deal with him. The girl explained that there were 5 extraordinarily strong cultivators on the other side, and 2 of them were close to rank 7. If she joins, he will have more combat power, and asked if she was speaking correctly. The main character agreed to team up with her and do everything as she said, after which he began to take the sword out of its sheath, and said that if she had other intentions, he would certainly kill her. The girl asked to believe her, because she always keeps her word. She began to sweat again, exhaling heavily. The girl admitted that the main character scared her seriously. Approaching her zombie, who stood rooted to the spot, the girl said that her big black one was damaged by him, and she said that he must pay for materials for its restoration. Grabbing the black boy by the shoulders, she noticed that he looked very pitiful. Noah closed his eyes and thought that the girl had given him too cute a nickname for a zombie with such a terrible face. A girl who plays with zombies is really something. Standing next to her little black one, the girl smiled and asked the main character what further instructions would be. The boy asked the girl to introduce him to the cultivators. He wants to have a friendly conversation with them. He needed to make friends with these people. And here we have Donlin Inn. This is the name of the tavern where the main character and the girl decided to go. She explained, pointing her finger at the inn, that those cultivators stop there all the time. They eat there and drink beer. Jerry told brother Noah that these people are not so weak. Why don't they first ask for support from headquarters, and then deal with them? The main character looked at the boy and asked him not to worry. He explained that he had no intention of fighting them to the death. The girl laughed and said that even if they fight to the death, they are just a bunch of cowards conspiring among themselves. People like them will not cause problems for the mighty Night Division. The boy looked at the girl again with a contemptuous look. He knitted his eyebrows and asked her to stop flattering. The girl put her hands on her hips and bent over, agreeing with him. But she asked why he was always so rude. And now the travelers have already entered the tavern. The waiter poured them hot, aromatic tea. They put the kettle on the table and the boy said that they were not warned about their arrival. He said that he would ask the chef to quickly prepare wine and good food for them. The main character turned to the waiter and asked him not to do this. He explained that they were here for work, and the guy could go. He needed to send the waiter as soon as possible, otherwise he would interfere with his plan. The waiter immediately turned around and left. The companions slowly sipped their tea, watching at the next table. Several men were sitting behind it. The girl asked Noah if he saw that big guy, and she explained that it was Duncan, nicknamed Jade Crushing Hand from Yangbai. He is a famous tomb robber. The man, looking at them, asked why the Night Division was here. Ghost Prince Dan, holding a cup of tea in his hand, answered Duncan that there was no need to worry. They didn't do anything like that. The girl explained that the man in black is the ghostly Prince Dan. A ghost rests inside his body. During the day, the ghost borrows his body and during the night helps him turn into a ghost. Duncan and Dan are the most outstanding of the five. The strength of the remaining three is ordinary and should not be feared. They are many times weaker than their comrades. This is how the girl told the main character about all the cultivators sitting at the next table. And Noah was calmly thinking about something while drinking tea. Then suddenly a man sitting at the next table slammed his fist on the table. The man was menacing, angry about something. He called the girl who was sitting next to the main character and asked why she became a puppet of the Night Division. He asked if she told them everything about them. Then the girl spread her hands to the side and answered that, if so, does he think he can do something about it? The old man who hit the table became very angry. He furrowed his eyebrows inward menacingly. Noah asked the girl who he was. The girl began to explain that he was a master of 9 illusions from a small rankless sect that mastered the art of illusions. His family was destroyed by the Night Division for attacking the Imperial Court, so he has endless hatred for the Night Division. The boy knitted his eyebrows in surprise at this story. The mustachioed old man told his boss that the Night Division was a problem. He thinks that he should deal with them first before searching for the treasure of Zhang Mountain. The boss replied that he was here to hunt for the treasure of the Zhang Mountains, and did not intend to conflict with the Night Division, and he asked who he was to order him. Then, suddenly, the main character raised his glass, and told the old man that his family was destroyed because his elders were as stupid as he was. They must have been the same small-minded empty talkers. After these words from the boy, the old man immediately turned to him and asked how he dared insult his teachers. He concentrated his power in his hand and exclaimed that he would kill him, after which his hands glowed with purple light, and he raised his ghostly sword into the air using his abilities. After this, the man became very angry and, glowing with purple rays, sent the main character to hell. Looking at him with menacing, crazy eyes, a glowing purple sword immediately flew at the boy. The tip was already flying towards his head, but then Newt, without thinking twice, put his fist forward, stopping his glowing sword. The bladed weapon immediately shattered into small pieces, falling to the floor. The old man glanced at the guy who stopped the sword. He didn't expect his weapon to fly apart so easily. Newt exclaimed that all he could do was pull low-level tricks that he couldn't hit. It is not surprising that the Night Division destroyed them. The old man did not expect to hear such speeches in his direction from these people. He immediately began to insult the Night Division. The mustachioed man told the main character that they do not want to be enemies of the Night Division, but he hopes that the guy will reveal his face to them and spare him. To open someone's face means to show or to address with respect, honor. Noah replied that he could not offer them face, but he can do something else, after which he abruptly stood up from the table and rushed towards the guy. He drew his sword and instantly found himself next to the mustachioed man. A bright white flash flashed, after which the mustachioed man rolled his eyes from a powerful blow with a sword. The main character cut off his head with one move of his sword. The head with bulging eyes immediately fell to the floor and rolled along it. She lay in a pool of scarlet-red blood. The eyes seemed to continue to look at everyone around. After which, the boy looked towards the other people and asked them what about the head. The boy still had his sharp metal sword in his hands, from which the enemy's blood flowed in a stream. Duncan asked, wrying his face, "What does this all mean? Killing right in front of them? Do they really think that they can be so easily intimidated?" The main character replied that this person belongs to the family of Taoist illusionary spirit, and he insulted their Night Division. He was meant to be killed for this. Then one of the guys sitting at the table told Noah that if he pissed them off, he wouldn't achieve anything good by doing so. Donlin County takes a long time to get to this village. Their division does not have enough power here. Why does he show his arrogance and temper when it is better not to do so? Another one of Duncan's people told the boss that it was pretty clear that this bunch of them didn't care about anything. He offered to fight them. Then a woman sitting at the same table got into the conversation. She said that this is Lucy's little trash, theirs, and let them leave this man to her. She will end him. Although she was very weak in strength, unlike Duncan and Dan, the two brothers from the Night Division immediately slammed their fists on the table at the same time. Sparks flew around their fists. The girl Lucy immediately exclaimed joyfully that they were going to fight. The girl's eyes shone with joy and excitement. She was a completely unusual child, and was drawn to everything interesting, unusual, and even dangerous. Duncan immediately slammed his fist on the table and asked everyone to shut up. After all, they are not here to cause any problems. After which the boss asked the Night Division what they needed from them. The man looked at the main character and thought, after all, he killed their man with just one move. This man has outstanding strength. They shouldn't fight him. Noah said that they all need the treasure of Jang Mountain. And the Night Division also wants to solve the case of the ghostly melody. If the melody and the treasure are somehow connected, it may cause conflict between them and become a problem. Of course, if they got into conflict now, they would definitely be in a losing situation. In this case, both the treasure hunt and the investigation will fail. Duncan replied that they just wanted to make money from this, and they did not want to somehow hurt the Night Division. How about teaming up to explore Met? In the end, who gets the treasure will depend on his abilities, and I asked the main character what he would say to this. At the same time, he still grabbed the hilt of the sword just in case. He was always ready in case of a surprise attack. Noah said that if their boss had shown such sincerity earlier, what happened earlier would not have happened. Dan told his boss that they couldn't talk to them about sincerity. Working with them is tantamount to asking a tiger for its skin. What did it mean to ask one of the negative characters to do something impossible? Duncan said that they have much less sincerity. If he can work with them, that is, he will not be afraid of the motto. Then Dan, sitting next to his boss, looked from under his brows at the people from the Night Division. His gaze was full of contempt and distrust. Noah said that Master Duncan said reasonable things. This time the treasure hunt is full of dangers, and combining their powers should increase their chances of success. Then the boss stood up to his full height and said that his name was Duncan. He asked how to contact him. The main character answered that his name is Noah, added that he is honest and trustworthy Noah. The boy was very modest, which was really funny from the outside. Jerry told brother Noah that this was very impressive. Just a few words and he convinced Duncan. The guy thought that he really wanted to become like the main character. Meanwhile, Newt's brother looked at him with a contemptuous look. Duncan suggested that the main character in this case should go looking for treasures during the day. At night, it would be much more dangerous. To which the boy replied, leaning on his hands while sitting at the table, that let it be as he wishes. And then the next morning came. In front of us is the huge rocky mountain Jangrong. It just started to bloom. The main character and Duncan walked forward, making their way through huge thick trees and many small bushes. Their people, united in one group, slowly moved closer and closer to their destination. Noah told Duncan that he had said that the treasure might be inside the Li Ryugong's tomb. There is no mention in Donglin's historical records that Ryugong is buried on this mountain. Duncan explained that big shots are always afraid that their grave will be ransacked when they die, so they point out the location of the tomb. He has experience in this matter, and with just a glance at the mountain, he can tell the location of the treasure. The boy, listening to his traveler, suddenly became worried as he heard some noise out of the corner of his ear. He turned his head to the side, peering into the bushes. Since it was just beginning to get light, it was still quite dark in the forest. A man from Duncan's group suddenly appeared in front of them. He told his boss that he had found 2 strange caves ahead. You need to take a look at them. Boss Duncan heard this and asked his man to take them there immediately. After all, this was probably the path to treasure. The guy immediately obeyed and they headed forward, following him. They tried to walk quietly so as not to attract the attention of enemies. The main character again began to listen to various sounds. He thought he heard something suspicious. Perhaps this sound came from the 2 caves they approached. They stopped right in front of the entrance to the caves. And before going there, they began to think. Some kind of purple, light, transparent smoke was coming from there. Dan said that these 2 caves exude heavy yin energy. He had some kind of ominous feeling. Lucy asked the main character which cave they would choose to explore. Then a strange sound was heard. Someone asked them for help. Someone read it, "Help me." And he reached out with his hand. The main character immediately wondered what it could be. Jerry and the girl opened their eyes, which seemed to fall out of their sockets. They were somewhat similar, like brother and sister. Noah and the others walked as close to the cave as possible. There was a man there who asked for help, and he pulled his hand forward. The main character came even closer and began to look at this man. Then his gaze changed sharply, and streams of sweat flowed down his cheeks. The girl standing nearby also carefully looked at who was in the cave. Jerry turned to the main character. He couldn't understand what was wrong with this man, so he asked Noah. Duncan also glanced in that direction and, moving his eyebrows to his nose, stood thoughtfully peering into the cave. The main character glanced at the boss, who in turn exclaimed, "Is it really him?" Obviously he recognized this man. Noah looked at the boss and asked if he could still recognize him even in such a terrible form. The man replied that even he could not identify it, but the amulet could still be identified. That is, he understood who it was only by the talisman hanging around his neck. This northerner's name is Judy. He is a famous bandit from the Yangbei region, specializes in dragon studies, acupuncture, and feng shui. Huang Feng and Yang Sanian are present here, in addition to Judy. This trio plundered many famous burial grounds. The main character exclaimed that such formidable bandits who came to plunder the grave had already been defeated. Looks like this cave is a little dangerous. Dan said that perhaps Judy chose the wrong path and encountered something very merciless. They shouldn't go this route. He asked what the boy thought if they went the other way. The main character replied that he did not mind. Duncan, in turn, said that in this case, only this path remains. Then the boy extended his hand to Boss Duncan and asked him to come inside with him. He even let him go ahead. Duncan noticed that the main character was very polite. He gave him a strange look. After which, so that others would not think that he was afraid of something, he decided to go first, followed by the others. The girl who was with them accidentally touched the main character with her shoulder, after which she chuckled. Noah thought that after arriving in Donlin County, a number of suspicious cases had occurred. You can say everything was strange from the very beginning, so it's better to be careful. The boy turned his head to the others and said that they were moving forward, so they needed to be careful. Jerry and his 2 brothers agreed with him. Each of them had very disturbing looks. After all, they did not know what awaited them ahead, what dangers and trials. And here in front of us is a deep entrance to the cave. It was very dark ahead, and only rocks and walls were visible. Jerry lit his magic torch, taking it in his hand to illuminate the cave. The guys began to peer forward. The main character approached the wall and touched one of the stones with his finger. He gently rubbed the stone while thinking about something. He said that this cave was not created by nature, as if it had been dug out. Jerry asked whether, in this case, the real grave of General Lee could be here. Noah rubbed 2 fingers together after touching the wall and said that right now, it's still hard to say for sure. Master Duncan and his men turned their heads sharply towards the cave. They looked where it was completely dark, but they couldn't see what was ahead because there was complete darkness, which fascinated me even more and gave me fear. Duncan exclaimed that this was the melody of a ghostly mountain, that melody that torments people every night. This melody sounds at night, and they did not stay in the cave for long. Could the music come from here? The main character asked if it was possible that the cave distorts human perception and time. Is it dark now? Lucy immediately shrank like a little hedgehog. She brought her little childish hands to her face, and she looked at Noah, after which the girl exclaimed that this cave is too strange. Why don't they go back and make a plan? The main character glanced at the girl and replied that it was too late for that. Should have stayed outside the cave earlier. The torch in Jerry's hands suddenly went out. He thought about the strange wind. His torch went out and it became completely dark. It was an unusual flow of wind. Doesn't quite look like a natural element. Surely there was some other meaning to this? The main character listened again. He was very attentive and careful. A red tent appeared in front of them, next to which stood two guys in long red robes and hats. Just like before the guy who was killed, these people carried this tent on their shoulders. They made some strange sounds and rose into the air, as if they were floating. If you look closely at them, you could understand that these are not people, but something else, similar to ghosts. Duncan heard some new sound from the side, and then he became wary. What could it be? He looked to the side and called the main character, showing something ahead. Not far from them, 4 people in long red robes were carrying some kind of huge wooden coffin in the air. The main character said that these are ghosts capable of combining red and white qi. They mentioned them in the compatible art of Tao. One of Duncan's men exclaimed that he didn't care. Now he would solve them in an instant. He was very nasty and impatient, and also a fool to allow someone to act in such a wrong way in this situation. But then suddenly a sharp blade of a shiny cold sword appeared in front of him. He immediately stopped looking at this sword. Noah, holding the sword in front of his face, said that they combine red and white qi. If he touches them, it will lead to an explosion of red qi and they will not die on the spot. Therefore, if he wants to die, then let him not involve them in this matter. Then the little man asked what they should do now. Noah explained that a ghost domain is a small world created by a specific environment combined with concentrated yin energy. Their possessions are fenced off by concentrated yin energy, which makes communication with the outside world impossible. There are only 2 ways to destroy their domain: either destroy all its inhabitants or follow their rules. These possessions have 2 dark qi. There must be a powerful demon at the center of the domain. They shouldn't face it head-on. The main character exclaimed that the only way to get out of here is to calculate every step, without making any mistakes. Otherwise it will all turn against them. Everything continued in this way. 4 people carried a red tent, and 4 people carried a huge wooden coffin. The main character and the rest of the people, in turn, followed them, trying to remain silent and not say anything unnecessary. They tried to act according to the rules of these guys carrying a tent and a huge coffin. Here, Jerry and Noah paused and looked ahead. In front of them was some kind of main mansion. Long, high steps led into it. The guys stopped right before the beginning of these steps. Dan said that this mansion is not an illusion created by a barrier or something similar. It is real. Lee must have abandoned the main mansion and erected another one on the mountain himself. The main character asked the boy why he went so far, what he was trying to achieve with this. Then the main doors opened, and a man in red clothes with a red headdress appeared on the threshold. The team of guys and the little girl looked ahead, wondering what would happen next. A creepy man with a huge mouth across his face said that today is not their mistress's wedding. He invites unusual guests inside. Lucy, bulging her big eyes, asked the main character what they should do now. Noah replied that he also follows the rules of ownership, yet he cannot say what can happen, so he needs to act according to their plan. A man in a long robe exclaimed that the guests had already arrived. They, in turn, overcame the high steps and found themselves at the entrance of the door. They began to go inside. The main character immediately looked forward, noticing something. There were tables in front of them, and there were not people sitting at them, but various monsters. Huge snakes with human hair, frogs with a human smile who drank tea, bulls who sat thinking. The woman turned to her boss. She said that this place was so creepy and suggested that he leave it as soon as possible. Duncan told her that there was no need to panic. Moreover, now is not the time to retreat. You need to be patient a little. The man who invited them in said that today was their mistress's wedding. Everyone can eat as much as they want. There is no need to hold back. After which, the man ordered to quickly serve food on the tables. He was very creepy, since his kind with 2 whole rows of teeth was from ear to second ear. Then they brought some kind of dish. On it stood a plate covered with a lid. The guests immediately wondered what could be inside. They were already sitting at one of the tables, carefully looking into the hall. Several people entered the door, carrying dishes covered with lids in their hands. It was not clear what was inside. They placed these dishes on the table right in front of their guests. The travelers carefully watched what was happening, after which Jerry was the first to decide to open the lid and see what was there. His look immediately changed. He was very frightened, and water was running down his cheeks. The boy moved his eyebrows to his nose, opening his already large eyes wide. He looked at this plate and thought that only Yukai could eat this. The plate was filled with dead rats, centipede beetles, and someone's bones. Lucy told Jerry to watch the others gobble it all up on both cheeks, and they seemed to really like it. The frog and snake immediately grabbed everything from the plate that stood in front of them. Someone grabbed the lizard. Someone grabbed someone's huge eye looking at them. Then the man who invited them to come inside exclaimed that the lady was there. The main character immediately looked to the side. He was wondering who the lady was. They all sat waiting, and then a lady appeared who began to speak. She prayed to the moon until her hair turned white, but the gods did not take pity. Boodle was unmerciful to her beauty. Her bloody hair will always remain under the moon, and the silk thread will always whisper. The lady was wearing a beautiful long dress that flowed to the floor. Her face was very white, like snow. She leaned over and asked if he would go with her to the end of the river Styx. There is a pendant of the main character that hung on his neck, and for some reason began to rise towards his face. Jerry looked at this, and was very surprised. Noah thought about it. This ghost seems to be extremely afraid of that woman in the red dress. She must be at the level of pestilence ghosts or hungry ghosts. If they were to fight such a destructive creature, they would have no chance of winning. Then the frog who was sitting at the table laughed and said that they were together forever. Why couldn't the groom be seen? One of the men with a huge mouth from ear to ear said that today they are all blessed. The guy who brought them inside said that their mistress wants to choose a husband from among the guests present. The chosen one will become the new owner of this mansion. One of Duncan's men asked with a grimace what his boss thinks. This woman probably needs a man. Then she seemed to hear what this guy asked and threw a terrible, contemptuous look at him. Her eyes glowed with a red fiery light. She waved her hand, from which ghostly black smoke emanated. After which this smoke swept this boy towards him with lightning speed. He flew far back. The woman's strength was incredible. The guy broke out in sweat and contorted his face. It would be better if he didn't say what he said. Then the woman approached him and asked if he wanted to marry her. Would he abandon her in this life, having lived and died with her? Duncan's man replied that he had never had any luck with women in his life. Even if she is a ghost woman, she looks extremely attractive. Therefore, he will not refuse her offer. The woman exclaimed that his heart was still beating and threw her creepy, glowing red gaze at him. She said that the dispersal agreed to marry the ghost, and how could he still remain human? Her black, long hair began to develop as if blown by the wind. The woman spread her arms to the sides, and the man, with a grimace, exclaimed what she was talking about. He was seriously scared, being completely wet with sweat. After which the woman directed all her strength to this man and scarlet blood splashed around. The main character was very surprised when he saw this and didn't understand what was happening. He was very puzzled by what happened. Meanwhile, it was a dark night outside. These are the terrible events that took place indoors at that time. The man who agreed to marry a ghost did not expect that she wanted to make him a ghost too. He began to get angry, but her dark long hair had already enveloped his arms and legs. The woman laughed evilly, looking in his direction, and she said that this was their treat. The man began to fall straight onto the table with the monsters. He crashed onto the table, overturning all the plates with caterpillars and cockroaches. The plates shattered as they fell to the floor. The monsters began to push each other, saying that everything should go to the old people first. Jerry opened his eyes in horror. Streams of sweat ran down his face. They were all simply shocked by what they saw. Then Jerry leaned towards the main character and asked if everything would be fine if he refused her offer. To which the boy replied that he thought that if he refused, he would die even worse in this case. He explained that this ghost does not pay attention to the choice of the groom. Whether he accepts the offer or not, the result will always be death. The main character began to explain to his comrades that if they want to survive, they should not answer according to the rules. After the woman dealt with that man, she began to look at everyone else. Her eyes glowed red, and her black hair fluttered in the wind. Dan, sitting at the table, closed his eyes. It was clear that the guy was very worried that her choice would go against him. The boy seemed to feel something. Beads of sweat ran down his cheeks. The woman already felt a unique gentleman. For some reason, approaching him, she noticed that he was half human, half ghost. With a bad character, but she liked him. Then, carefully examining the boy, she approached him and asked if he wanted to marry her. The guy, in turn, glanced at this creepy woman and simply froze. I didn't know what to answer. He moved his eyebrows to his nose and froze in place. After which, the boy got up from the table and told the lady that this was the warrior Noah, who was behind him, younger and more handsome than him. For her, he will certainly be a more worthy groom. The main character immediately gave him a contemptuous look. Jerry, who was standing nearby, opened his mouth in bewilderment. Lucy was also very surprised. Then the ghost woman glanced at the main character and noticed that he was definitely handsome. Jerry remained standing with his mouth open and looked at the main character. He wondered what he would do now. The boy, closing his eyes, calmly answered the woman. He said that she was very kind to him. After which he got up from the table and approached the guy whom this woman had originally chosen. Approaching him, he clenched his fist and punched him as hard as he could in the face. The boy staggered, very surprised by what the main character did. He looked at him with his contemptuous gaze. The guy was very angry and didn't understand how he dared to hit him. Duncan, in turn, glanced at the girl sitting next to him. She simply remained silent without answering anything. The ghost woman with red eyes exclaimed, "What does this all mean?" She looked at the boy with her creepy, fiery eyes. Noah told her that the lady had given him her attention by calling his name, but he dared to neglect the lady's courtesy. So he had to teach him a lesson in front of her. The ghost woman replied that she liked his character. She asked him if she was beautiful. The boy replied that of course she was beautiful. The main character said that the beauty of the lady can be compared with sea mermaids, with angels from heaven, with a flower under the light of the moon. Her smile can conquer an entire country. And the beauty of the lady is simply unique. Her beauty is like a breathtaking dream, like a graceful dragon, like a beautiful autumn chrysanthemum, as lush as spring blossoms, as nimble as clouds blocking the moon, as flexible as the breeze during a snowfall. Jerry, looking down, said what brother Noah was talking about. Why can't he understand a single word? The brother standing next to him replied that these phrases are universal. If he comes to a brothel, he can spend the night there without losing a penny. The woman said that even if she is so beautiful, his heart has changed. She sacrificed everything for him, but he still abandoned her after achieving fame, becoming a great general. Having said this, she got angry and exclaimed that all men are heartless, white-eyed wolves. They all deserve to die. The main character realized that this woman in red was really Lee's wife. She turned into a ghost because she harbored a great grudge against him. The woman asked that after he recognized her beauty, whether he wanted to marry her and die with her after life. Then the main character, bowing before the ghost woman, answered honestly that he did not want this. Jerry looked at the boy with curiosity and asked if brother Noah was rejecting her with these words. Then the ghost woman spread her arms to the sides and exclaimed that he was the same heartless man. The boy folded his hands in front of him, closed his eyes, and answered the woman. What he doesn't want is not because he doesn't want to, but because he's unworthy. Then the woman asked what he meant by this. Her hair fluttered as if there was wind in the room. Noah thought that this ghost must own this estate. If they do not dispel her resentment, he will not be destined to leave this place. The boy exclaimed that not only was he not worthy, there was not a single man in the world worthy of her. The main character thought that from now on, he would have to use his 3-inch tongue. He said that the lady is not only beautiful, but also has the deepest feeling of love. She helped the unknown Lee, a native of Jianghu, become a great army general. Such a warm-hearted wife cannot be found either in heaven or on earth. What more should a husband want from such a wife? It wouldn't take him 100 lifetimes to get a woman like her. He doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. He was unfaithful, like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Such a person should be damned forever. He knows that the relationship between them could not last forever. The woman wants revenge on Lee. But she still shouldn't do it. He should be damned until the end of his life, but she is such an innocent soul. How can she tarnish herself? You shouldn't humiliate yourself for the sake of such a shameless villain like him. The woman thought that this had some meaning, and the boy decided that it looked like she had succumbed to his persuasion, and he should continue pushing her. Noah said that this villain even changed historical records, marking her as an empty-headed and envious person. Today, they met, and he realized that these mentions in the records were complete nonsense. After he gets out of here, he will immediately correct the historical records, thereby restoring the innocence of his mistress. The ghost woman began to get angry thinking about her husband. Did he really do that? The main character said that his name is Noah. What does honest and trustworthy mean? If anything said is not true, may the heavens strike him with lightning 5 times. The boy raised his 2 fingers up as proof that he was telling the truth. Then the ghost woman, gritting her teeth, turned to her husband mentally. She exclaimed that he had been deceiving people for too long, and the main character felt what an indignant aura and burning chi emanated from this woman. The ghost woman exclaimed that today she alone would spare them and asked to get out in order to change the records. She asked them to tell the whole world what trash her husband was. She said they better not fool her. Otherwise, she will kill them even if they hide at the edge of the world. Even the seal of this mansion won't stop her. Noah said that he would have done this even without her words. And I thought that the mansion and Jing Mountain were shrouded in a seal. Then too, he could break this seal. The man approached the main character and said that the lady allowed them to leave the estate. He asked to use the back door, since the main door is inaccessible at night. Duncan moved his eyebrows to his nose and exclaimed that he still did not fully understand what was happening. The boy standing next to him asked if they could leave. The girl standing next to the guy said that no matter what, it was better for them to get out of here as soon as possible. Then the ghost woman cast her creepy gaze at this girl. Apparently she heard what this girl was talking about, after which she began to wrap her long black hair around the girl's neck. She began to lift her up by the neck with these hairs, right up to the ceiling. The girl could not understand why. What was happening to her? The girl began to choke. Her eyes popped out of her sockets and her tongue came out of her mouth. The ghost woman said that she must be one of those obscene women whose presence is sought after by men. Women like these deserve to die. The main character, looking at the girl Lucy, said that it seems that her flat chest turned out to be an advantage. The girl immediately got angry and exclaimed what he was talking about. She was seething with rage. Before us is still the same mansion. White ash was flying around the roof like some kind of snowball. The guys were already looking out the window onto the street. I thought I'd rather get away from this ominous place. There were human skulls and bones lying around. Duncan said that it looked like someone had already been here before them. You are looking at everything in front of you. However, they did not have time to find out, so they must definitely get out of here. After which, after some time, they began to make their way out of this building and back into the cave. The main character exclaimed that they had finally returned. The rest thought that they had really gotten out of that terrible place. Dan told Boss Duncan that not long ago he almost killed this Noah. He could try to kill him in return. They should take care of each other. Otherwise, if one died, the others would most likely not survive. Duncan agreed with him. He said that it was better for them to leave as soon as possible, because even if they find blood, he is afraid that they will not use it in this life. Duncan turned to the main character. He said that it looked like there were a lot of troubles ahead. She and Dan don't want to continue. The girl Lucy looked at these warriors in surprise. How come they decided not to continue this path? Then suddenly the girl screamed that there was something ahead. In front of them in the cave, leaning his elbows on the stones, was indeed a man lying. A large notepad lay next to him. Duncan exclaimed that even this guy had been here. They all rushed towards the man. The main character, looking at the man, seemed to recognize someone in him. He thought that this was one of those they were talking about. Duncan agreed with him, explaining that it is one of the Yangbei tomb robber trio. He recognized this man. The main character said that he and the one they met at the entrance are part of the same group. It looks like both cave entrances lead to the same place, after which their gaze fell on the man's hand, near which lay a large blue notebook. This was probably a very good and necessary find. They thought it was his journal and immediately picked up the notebook from the floor. The main character did not disdain to take this notebook. After all, there could be a lot of necessary, interesting information that would help them in the future, and even at the present moment. And he immediately opened it, wondering what could be inside. His eyes changed color. Noah stood very thoughtful with a serious expression on his face. Streams of sweat began to run down his face. The boy seemed scared of something, although he usually remained unperturbed. But sometimes his emotions betrayed him too. Then a girl approached the boy. She looked at him in surprise and asked what it was saying. The girl was also a little curious and wanted to know what would happen next. The main character explained that everything was written there about the Taoist priest. He began to read carefully. Here is all the information about him in detail. 500 years ago, there was a priest who called himself the Taoist of 1,000 souls in Jianghu. There was a rumor that he possessed the great power of resurrection. Each time he died, he separated a part of his soul and returned to this world. The Taoist of 1,000 souls was so powerful that he once fought with the masters of the Luo, White Lotus, and Maitreya clans, without losing, after which he became known throughout the world. Many feudal lords offered their hospitality to the priest in order to learn the art of immortality. After all, it was all to their advantage. Many people were obsessed and interested in this. Later, for unknown reasons, the Taoist of 1,000 souls mysteriously disappeared. And after a while, only a few news about him appeared in Jiang. If he comes back to life after death, can this be considered immortality? This goes against the usual perception of hermetism. If one could live that long, even a pig could become an immortal martial saint. Duncan asked what exactly the message in Juan's hand meant. This might interest people. Dan exclaimed that he, in turn, would not leave even if it cost him his life. He wants to see the treasure, and here in front of us is a high mountain, above which a bright narrow moon shines. The bright stars illuminated everything around. It seemed that nothing foreshadowed trouble. But their path, their journey was very dangerous, and of course, unpredictable. The guys headed further, passing through the dense green thicket of the forest. They made their way through the trees and bushes without giving up on their goals and plans, although anything could happen along the way. The main character said, addressing the gentleman, that the treasure hidden here should be nearby, so we should move on. Then Jerry noticed something ahead. He asked the main character to look at what he saw. Then the main character immediately asked what he saw there. In front of them was a building with a large closed gate. Noah said that this was most likely Lee's tomb. He glanced at this large building. It looked more like some kind of crypt, dark and a little gloomy. They noticed that the door there was open, and they thought that maybe someone had gone there before them. Most likely, someone went there, but perhaps never came back. But despite everything, they still entered these doors. The main character said that what awaits them ahead could be very dangerous, so he asked everyone else to be careful. After all, once they go inside, they may not come out either. Duncan said that something is wrong here. If this is Lee's tomb, then why was there information about the Taoist of 1,000 souls? However, there was something wrong with their journey. Everything was too incomprehensible and very dangerous. The main character listened carefully to his comrade as he walked forward. Then his gaze fell on something lying in front of them. It was imperative to find out what it was. The boy and all his people came as close as possible. They saw in front of them some kind of wooden structure that looked like a coffin. She was tied with chains that restrained him from all sides. Duncan exclaimed that these were 9 hidden dragon chains holding the coffin. I wonder what that same Lee was trying to achieve. Did he really want his descendants to be emperors too? Noah asked Duncan if this arrangement had any special meanings in feng shui. After all, the guy was trying to find any clue in order to understand what would happen next. The man thoughtfully replied that a bronze coffin on the edge of dragon chains, feng shui, means that it will someday be robbed. Therefore, they want to protect it as reliably as possible. This location means that future burglars will be able to easily break these chains. These are the rules of feng shui. But hidden dragon chains can be removed by Dragon Kui, and 9 dragons will lower the coffin only to the current emperor. I wonder how an army general could agree on such a coffin. And what did he achieve with this? Then the boy Jerry exclaimed with his eyes wide open. What if this is Lee's tomb? Then the treasure should most likely be inside his coffin. Duncan looked at Jerry carefully, thinking about his words. His comrade, in turn, glanced at the man. They behaved very strangely, as if they had conceived some insidious, cunning plan against them. The girl Lucy also began to look at this giant coffin wrapped in healthy, thick metal chains. She looked at him very carefully with wide eyes. Duncan constantly said a lot that since this is the case, enough talk about honor. Let their abilities not determine the owner of the treasure. After which the man and his comrade, clenching their fists, rushed to the coffin as quickly as possible. The main character, noticing this, moved his eyebrows to his nose and thought that these two were completely ungrateful. He asked if they really wanted to kill them all by opening this coffin. Duncan exclaimed, looking at the main character, that brother Noah is really too fast. After which he took a fighting stance. And the boy had already taken out his sharp long sword. Duncan glanced at the boy from under his brows and asked if his little brother finally wanted to fight him in one duel. The man was eager for some kind of showdown and bloodshed. Then, also taking a fighting stance, without letting go of his sharp sword from his hands, Noah said that the 2 evil monks killed many people. Even if he killed them, it would mean eliminating the threat to other people. Duncan's comrade asked me to stop wasting time chatting. He suggests starting a life-and-death battle as soon as possible, which showed that they really had insidious, cunning plans against them. The main character couldn't believe his eyes. It's not that simple. Why are they doing this now? Duncan's comrade began to change his appearance. Suddenly his hand turned into a creepy bone hand with long black claws. They were very sharp-looking and twisted. The guy began to turn into some kind of demon. He laughed and told Master Noah that he was so strong in the main residence and said that he still felt the blow that the boy hit him. He stood on all fours in front of them. The legs also turned into creepy hooked limbs with sharp black claws. Lucy and Newt, seeing what began to happen, were very surprised, opening their eyes wide. The main character, in turn, was, as always, quite unperturbed. He said in response to the enemy that without his blow the guy would have become meat in the soup of demons. Then Dan whispered with his nasty hooked mouth to his boss Duncan that he, in turn, would take care of the main character Noah. And he, in turn, asked him to take care of the others. Duncan, looking at the monster guy, asked him to take the treasure first. He believes that it is not worth them joining the battle yet. The man still did not understand what the discovery of this huge tomb could lead to. After these words, the man began to rise in the air like a bird flying up to a coffin bound in chains. The main character remained standing opposite the monster without releasing his sharp sword. Newt and everyone else glanced up at where Duncan was flying. They understood that it was very bad what the guy was going to do with the coffin. The main character shouted to his comrades to stop Duncan quickly. He explained to them that they should not allow him to touch the coffin for anything in the world, because then it would be very bad for all of them. It's not a fact that they will even get out of here alive. Jerry, having heard the order of the protagonist, immediately decided to obey him. Speaking of which, they will do so. Noah, in turn, took his bladed weapon a little differently, pressing it to his chest. He asked the monster guy if he wanted to go further. If he wants, let him go through it. The monster opened its creepy eyes and looked at the guy. Instead of pupils, he had simply white, glowing eyes. The monster grinned. After which he opened his terrible mouth with long, sharp fangs. He rose in the air, baring his claws. The monster exclaimed that if Noah was in such a hurry to die, then he would certainly arrange it. At this time it is dark. They are deep underground, and the yin energy in this place is incredibly powerful. His strength is at its peak. He was too creepy and overconfident at that moment. But for every terribly strong person, there is someone stronger. The main character, clutching his sword tighter, was ready to attack. His weapon glowed with fiery light. It was as if he was being embraced by tongues of hot flame. The boy exclaimed that he is always at his peak. After which, having prepared himself, Noah concentrated all his strength and energy and began to fly towards the enemy, clutching his sword glowing with fire. His sword resembled the start of some kind of fire. The evil monster approached him with a terrible roar, revealing his sharp black claws. He couldn't stop baring his fangs. They simply couldn't be called teeth. The main character had already flown up to him with his sword and struck as hard as he could on his hand, which simply split into two halves. The boy cut it lengthwise. It was a very terribly unpleasant sight. But after this blow, the boy could not understand what was happening. He listened to different sounds and tried to understand where this evil demon had disappeared. He, in turn, looked around, but did not see the enemy. The main character began to look all around, but he still couldn't see where his opponent had gone. He was on guard, not letting go of his fiery sword. The chains around looked like some kind of prison for convicts. The boy began to listen and tried to figure out where he could go. He was all tense, but didn't panic at all. Then he heard an evil laugh not far from him above his head. The monster exclaimed that he was here. A light purple smoke emanated from it. The monster touched the chain with one hand, taking it into his vile hand. After which he tried to kick the main character while holding his hands on top. The boy's sharp weapon instantly flew out of his hand, landing in the cold, rocky soil. Noah thought that it was too crowded here for special combat techniques. The boy decided that he definitely needed to change a position that would be more advantageous for him. His sword was stuck in the stones, and the monster guy stood on chains, preparing for another attack. He stood on chains as if on the floor, as if there was an increase in these chains. He thought the boy was trying to escape. After which, he decided to approach the main character with an attack. The monster guy began to slowly jump off these healthy chains that clinked with metal. And the main character, noticing this, began to think, forming another plan in his head. His wits were at work again. He was trying to decide how to react to this situation as quickly as possible, to repel another enemy attack. And then the monster's face changed its expression. He grimaced, closing his eerie, glowing white eyes. After which the main character caught him by the leg, exclaiming that he had finally caught him. He caught his leg with his demonic hand. A light purple smoke emanated from his hand. The boy tightly squeezed the monster's vile leg without letting go. after which he began to use new force and asked this monster to get out quickly. He pushed him away from him as far as possible. Streams of terrible scarlet-black blood flew around. The monster flew away from him, bleeding. The main character cut off his leg with a sword. The enemy doubled over in pain, falling onto huge cold stones, breaking them with his back. He growled with a terrible cry. Leaning his back against the wall, the monster stood on one leg. Noah immediately began to approach him with a quick, confident step. The girl, meanwhile, looked at what was happening. She was all wet with sweat because she was too worried. After all, this man is a terrible monster. The monster, standing on one leg, laughed an evil laugh. Streams of blood flowed from his other leg. But he did not give up and did not calm down his lousy, evil temper. The main character stood opposite him. He was thinking about what to do next to finish off this monster. The boy began to look closely at his severed leg, and I noticed that fibers began to appear little by little. Noah realized that he could regenerate, and then the monster's leg began to slowly grow. Tissue and bones began to appear on it. The monster laughed evilly. The monster exclaimed that this is not the end yet. He said that he could recover from any wounds inflicted on him, even completely fatal ones. The main character gave him a contemptuous look. He thought that his strength was definitely incredible after transforming into a ghost, but his weakness was also quite noticeable. He relies entirely on instincts and combat experience, just like an animal, without a single trace of martial arts. Realizing this, the boy thought about it and closed his eyes, meditating a little. He put his hand forward, pressing two fingers together. They glowed with a bright yellow flame, after which this yellow light turned into a huge yellow seal. The ghost guy looked at this and gritted his evil teeth. It was noticeable that he began to be afraid. He was very scared of what the boy began to do. Then the main character concentrated all his strength and exclaimed that now he was finished. The guy stood in a fighting stance with his hand extended forward. A stream of powerful force concentrated on the monster flew towards him like a hot flame of fire. After which, when the fiery flames disappeared, clouds of smoke and dust appeared in this place. Cave stones began to fall from the ceiling and from the walls directly into this pile of dust. The sharp blade of the sword flashed to the side in a fiery, bright yellow wave. Sparks flew from the tip of the sword, scattering around and hitting the walls of a huge cave. The monster was still alive. It was shrouded in thick gray smoke. He looked through this smoke at the main character. After a short pause, the monster exclaimed that the golden seal meant nothing against him. The main character was already very close to the monster. Approaching him, he said that this was just a cover, since this is what he used for his main attack. Until now, he was just playing with him, so don't let him think that he can defeat him so easily. The boy began to use the art of smashing a monster hunter's sword. He turned around and waved his sharp weapon as if drawing a circle around himself above his head. Everything started to glow red and yellow again. It was as if lightning came from the tip of his sword and from himself. After such a powerful blow, the main character cut off not only his opponent's hand, but also cut his body in half from head to bottom. He simply cut it lengthwise into two parts. The monster began to fall on the cold stones, half at a time. His face remained contorted and blood gushed around in a terrible bloody stream. Once on the cold stones, one of the halves of his face exclaimed that this was impossible. He was lying in a pool of his own blood, still trying to say something. The main character remained unperturbed. He just paused and closed his eyes. After which the boy exhaled, as if he had meditated a little, and calmed himself down. But he didn't stand for long with his eyes closed. After thinking a little, he opened his eyes and directed his gaze at another enemy. The boy thought that now only Duncan remained. He began to glance upward to understand what was happening, since while he was dealing with this monster, his comrades were trying to stop another enemy. Duncan was at the very top of the coffin lid, bound with mighty thick iron chains. Opposite him stood two brothers. The guys told the enemy that Dan had already been defeated by the main characters. Preparing to attack him, the boy continued to say that he had better stop, otherwise it would be worse for him. One of the brothers put his hand forward, as if a sharp and terrible stake was coming out of it. He was seriously preparing for an attack, and he exclaimed, turning to Duncan, that he would definitely go to prison. Duncan remained just as unperturbed. He twisted his lousy face and answered his brothers that he was not afraid of them, because weaklings like them meant nothing to him. After which the evil enemy clenched his hands, from which a light yellow smoke emanated. He clenched his teeth, then smiled viciously and exclaimed that he wished them death, and now they would die. But then the boy who put his hand forward in the form of a stake flew up to him as close as possible using his bone spike. When he reached the enemy, he grabbed his bone spike with his hand glowing with yellow light. It was as if the hand were burning the edge of a bone spike. A thin stream of light smoke began to emerge from it. The boy opened his wide eyes, not understanding what was happening. With his extraordinary strength, Duncan squeezed the strong, cold edge of his bone spike, and he simply broke it into small pieces flying around. Duncan, having done this, again squeezed his second hand with his palm facing forward. He was already approaching the boy. "I'm going to attack again." The man was serious. He was ready to kill them all. But then he seemed to hear something. Suddenly the man became wary and glanced somewhere to the side. Between him and the boy, a huge yellow golden dragon appeared from somewhere. Powerful energy emanated from him. The beast, glowing with gold, opened its terrible mouth. His eyes glowed with a bright yellow light, and the teeth were sharp like swords. Jerry, who was standing below, began to stretch out his hand, also using force. A yellow luminous smoke began to rise from his hand directly towards the enemy. Duncan, seeing this dragon, immediately asked how he dared to attack him. The man seemed to be afraid of nothing. He was ready for any attack and offensive. The girl told Jerry that he should go ahead. She pushed him to achieve the feat, explaining that he needed to help the others, and she, in turn, would wait for him here below.
Jerry looked at the girl and thought that it looked like he was the only one helping. He knitted his eyebrows towards his nose, streams of sweat running down his cheeks.
Lucy, closing her eyes, said that there was no other way, because her zombie could not jump above these chains, and you can't get the treasure out of there. The guy was offended and looked towards the girl.
Then suddenly the main character jumped from below and found himself already on top of the coffin lid. He found himself between the two brothers and asked them to move away. He himself wanted to deal with this enemy further. They immediately obeyed and stepped aside.
Then the main character began to release his left demonic hand. It was already glowing with a greenish bright flame. I put my demonic hand forward. The boy asked Duncan to surrender or join his comrade, who was already resting in peace. Duncan, in this situation, knitted his eyebrows and decided to assess the situation. The man realized that there were really too many of them. In this case, in order not to give up, all that was left was to grab the treasure and run. Then the man, without thinking twice, suddenly jumped down from the lid of the coffin. He landed with one knee on a rock. After which the man, before standing up, accidentally glanced ahead of himself. Immediately his eyes opened very wide. He immediately began to sweat profusely. The man saw a monster lying on the floor in front of him. He recognized some familiar woman in this monster. Duncan rose to his feet and, coming closer to her, recognized her. The man thought that it looked like she tried to open the coffin with some secret technique, but something went wrong. If he tries to open this coffin by force, the man wonders whether he will repeat her fate. Still, he was afraid to be in this woman's place and repeat her such a terrible fate. The main character stood on the lid of the coffin and glanced at Duncan. He wondered if, despite him, the man still wanted to get this treasure. The boy simply pierced him with his keen gaze. He told the man that he was on the verge of death. Then the man replied that gaining power and wealth is always associated with risk. And clenching his fists, he exclaimed that now he doesn't care anymore.